Joe. Oh, trying to see if I have heard that. Yes. Oh my god. Oh dear god. It's torture. Stop it. No, I'm doing that already. Okay, I'm trying to see about down his music. Uh, yeah, was it? I should have done this before streaming. I didn't actually know I was gonna, but I like started this stream. Like, wow, let's buy it. Ah, music. No. Don't you have a thing to do music? You have a you have a thing. I'm probably not supposed to show this, but I don't really have anything that I'm like concerned about here. Your claim. See, look at this. I have no claims. I'm great. Well, I give up. We're gonna have a deadly silence stream. I'm gonna be reading anyway. Not a big deal. So, for anyone watching the VOD, oh, this today? Nah, couldn't have been. It very possibly could have been. I have no idea. Nah, it couldn't have been. It hasn't reached the time yet. Okay, fair. Anyway, sorry, this stream's been scuffed to start, but I wanted to read some of my old stories because I can, uh, and sometimes that can be fun. Also, I'm just kind of in the mood to do it. Okay, so this is the first one. Some of these are really old, so expect scuffed grammar and stuff like that. Some of these are more recent, so Yes, can I help? Oh, I see. Okay, let's get started. My prey gallanted ahead of me, and I kept chase. The wind in my fur, the moon on my back, and the crackle of autumn leaves beneath my huge paws. I lunged, my large, sharp teeth closing over the neck of the unfortunate stag. The beautiful creature fell, and I ripped its throat out with little remorse. I was starving, and this was how nature worked. If I hadn't killed the poor thing, something else would have, and who was I to let good meat go to waste? I feasted upon my catch victoriously before I curled up in a small ditch and slept. I suspected I would regret my hunt by morning, but that was then, and this is now. 28 days prior. Marcus Leroy hadn't known what he'd been getting into when he followed his friend Joey Carlson on this camping trip. He had told his friend very specifically he wasn't allowed to go anywhere near the Western Forest. Where did Joey decide to take him camping? The Western Forest. To be honest, he had suspected his friend's intentions the second he'd been asked to join the camping trip. There had been stories all over the news about animal attacks, brutal ones that appeared to come from an unprecedentedly large wolf, unlike any species humans had ever encountered. There were national science organizations crowding the town all year, and animal preservationists desperately kept telling everyone to just leave the animals alone. Then there were also legal teams involved with the whole ordeal because they needed to prevent more deaths. He had been just as curious as Joey and wanted to check the forest out. Even the scientists, preservationists, and law officers were banned from the forest in hopes that leaving the violent wolf alone would prevent any more tragic deaths. They both knew that the forest would be empty, and they were very excited. Joey was the only one who spoke his excitement, though. Marcus, being the quiet hermit that he was, just listened to his boisterous friend zealously tell him the whole plan. He said they'd hike just a bit to the outskirts of town and then sneak past the rusted yellow sign saying, "Warning, dangerous animals do not pass." and set up camp just a bit inside the forest. That had been days ago. He was deeply starting to regret his agreement to this. The trees towered over him, feeling larger than he remembered them being as a kid. They created a canopy above their heads that would have only let the animals with that would have only let minimal amount of lights through. Not they create they created a canopy above their heads that would have only let the minimal amount of light through. Not that it mattered, though, since it was late at night and the sky was blotted out. The ground was covered with moss, twigs, and leaves, and it was cold. Joey was more adventurous than Marcus, but Marcus had enough curiosity to keep up. You know what I'm curious about? Dang. I was pretty sure that there used to be a reading tool which you could do editing. Yes. Show equation. Show section. Horizontal line. I thought there was a way that you could, by chance, like as you scrolled down, you could you could read with it. There was like a line you could down. Which would be great for the whole like reading on stream thing. They do not appear to see. Da. Well, I give up. I'm not great at setting. We shall just continue as we were. Not that it mattered, since it was late at night and the sky was blotted out. The ground was covered with moss, twigs, and leaves, and it was cold. Joey was always more adventurous than Marcus, but Marcus had enough curiosity to keep up. Despite his absolute incapability in social situations, Marcus had more stupid courage than most people might think at first glance. He could hear the howls of the wolves, but every time he brought it up, Joey swore he was just hearing things. Maybe Marcus was, but that didn't change the fact that he was starting to see the stupidity about sneaking into a forest that people scarcely left alive anymore. Joey, I really think this might be a bad idea. I mean, it seemed mysterious and exciting when you first brought it up, but what if we really do run into a wolf? I don't have any training in how to handle that, and neither do you. Do we hold very still? Do we run? Or maybe we should play dead? Marcus rambled fearfully. Joey chuckled quietly to himself. Marcus hardly ever spoke a word unless he was panicking, and Joey always thought it was cute, regardless of how many times his friend had protested. Joey had a really hard time not seeing his friend like a nervous little brother. It didn't help that Marcus was tiny and had big dark blue eyes. His friend also had messy pure black hair that often fell into his lapis eyes. Joey had a sneaking suspicion Marcus could keep his hair back if he wanted, but preferred it the way it was. And he had unnaturally pale skin, which was likely because he never left his dark bedroom without haggling from Joey. He had large, thick-rimmed glasses, which Joey had discovered weren't even real a while after first befriending Marcus. Marcus had told him that the glasses made him feel a bit more comfortable talking to people. Joey didn't really understand it himself, but if it helped Marcus, who was he to judge? It didn't take a genius to figure out Marcus had social anxiety or that he was a bit depressed. Everyone somehow just knew when they looked at him. It's not like he made it obvious or anything. He dressed just like any normal teenager and he worked hard in class, though he never rose his hand. But he was just a little too quiet. There was a little too much coffee in his cup in the morning, and the bags beneath his dark blue eyes, were just a little too purple. Joey, like most people, saw the signs, but instead of avoiding Marcus and sending him piteous stares like the rest of the class, he had taken to following the boy around like an overly excitable puppy dog. Once you got to know Marcus a bit more, you noticed things, like how he'd ramble when he was nervous, or how he spoke sarcasm like a second language, but as soon as somebody spoke to him, he didn't understand. You also might notice how he never met anybody's eyes, and how he wouldn't let people touch him, and if he did, he'd subtly wipe the area as if he could brush the touch off. He excelled in almost all of his classes except history, and despite how quiet he was with others, and this he shouldn't be here, and this B should be lowercase. He excelled in almost all of his classes except history, and despite how quiet he was with others, he always had something to say when they were alone. Joey had easily become addicted to hearing Marcus's thoughts. Joey thought it was a shame more people didn't talk to Marcus, but at the same time he was glad, because he didn't particularly feel like sharing his best friend. Relax, Marcus, we'll be fine. We're just going to set up in the clearing up here and sleep for the night. It's been forever since we camped in this forest, Joey declared excitedly. Marcus smiled fondly at the memory. When they were kids, his father had brought them up here to go camping. It had been a night of s'mores, scary stories, and stargazing. They'd both loved it and had returned once or twice, but that had been years ago. They'd become busy doing other things around town and had forgotten about their camping trips. When they stepped into the clearing, they both gasped and broke into beaming smiles. The beautiful stars and the full moon were visible here, and the canopy of trees had a hole for the light to shine down onto the grass that grew here, despite not growing anywhere else in the forest. The sun could reach the ground here, and only here, so grass grew plentifully and crawled up to their hips. Wild flowers could be spotted if they looked close enough, bathing in the moonlight, but mostly they just saw tall grass and stars. It was so beautiful. Their tent pushed some of the grass down, and they made a circle around their camp of stomped down grass. When you sat on the ground, you could barely see over the stalks of grass. They were very careful about making a fire in an abnormally large pan. They would have to remember to put it out before going to sleep. The grass here was very much alive, and therefore not likely to catch fire, but they wouldn't be taking any risks. After setting everything up, including a fire, the two friends lay down and stared at the sky. Marcus had calmed down by now and was glad he had come. Tomorrow, in the plain daylight, they would go looking around the forest for anything interesting. Marcus didn't have any plans of finding the animal, but finding some tracks or an old den would be awesome. If Joey wandered too far in the forest for comfort, Marcus was sure he could convince him to come back. Eventually, they put out the fire, crawled into the tent, and fell asleep. But before Marcus closed his eyes, he could swear he heard an ominous howl reverberate through the night. Only a few hours later, the call of nature woke him up, and he was about to go out to relieve himself, but as soon as he peered into the dark, he lost his nerve. He decided to make sure he was that right there. That way I can see it if a chat comes. But I lost my spot. But he lost his nerve. He decided to make sure if he was in danger, his friend would be able to call for help. Joey, he whispered urgently to his friend. When Joey only grumbled and rolled over, he shook his friend's shoulder. Joey, wake up! He whispered a little louder, directly in his friend's ear. Ugh, Marcus, what time is it? He whined. I have to use the restroom. Just call for help or something if I'm not back in a few minutes. It shouldn't take long, Marcus. It shouldn't take long. Marcus would be back before Joey inevitably fell asleep in boredom. If Joey had been more awake, he would have suggested his friend just take a piss outside the tent, but he knew Marcus would be too embarrassed to not go at least behind a tree. He would have also teased his friend about this modesty, but since he wasn't more awake, he just replied, yeah, sure, and rolled back over to go to sleep. Marcus was satisfied when he saw Joey check the time on his phone and he left the tent. The moon was at its highest point in the sky, and he stopped to admire it for a second, until his bladder reminded him of why he had left the tent in the first place. He walked into the trees and a bit away from the clearing, not far enough where he'd get lost, but far enough to where he felt comfortable relieving himself. When he finished, he went to walk back to the clearing, but a twig loudly snapping behind him had him freezing in place. Turning around very slowly, he gasped when he saw a huge brown wolf, a snarl on its lips. A low rumbling growl left the beast's mouth, and Marcus whimpered a little to himself. He wasn't far from the clearing, but what would he do when he got there? There should be a question mark here. They didn't bring any weapons, probably because they were idiots who weren't really thinking this plan through when they had made it, and no authority could arrive before he'd be mauled to death. Then an even more frightening thought hit him. What if Joey was attacked and died because he led the wolf back to the clearing? He remembered being so alone and hating everything and everyone because they all hated him. He could see it in the looks they gave him. On the outside, everyone looked sympathetic and kind, but if they had cared even a little, then they wouldn't have avoided him like the plague. He wasn't easy to be around, and they couldn't accept that, so they isolated him and pretended he wasn't there. Joey had been different. Joey was like a puppy, following him to support. Thanks, Mimi! Joey was like a puppy, following him around as loyal as could be, defending him from the masses, and at the same time protecting him from depression. Feeding off the dark thoughts like some knight in shining armor. or fending off the dark thoughts like some knight in shining armor. He had always stared at the girls around him longingly, but not once, even when the girls had hit on him, had Joey abandoned Marcus in favor of a girl, despite the fact that Marcus could see how badly he wanted to be close to someone. Joey was loud, and normally that would have scared or bothered him, but Joey was the exception. He was funny and kind and knew when Marcus had reached his limit. Marcus could see in his mind's eye that loving, caring friend protecting him from this wolf and ending up dead on the ground. Would you? I love my child's reading. Oh, thanks, Father. Friend protecting him from this wolf and ending up dead on the ground, his esophagus torn from his throat, his spinal cord mutilated, his muscled form gained from track, and his wild adventures ripped to pieces. Chunks of skin missing and claw marks littering his corpse. No, not for me. Oh, my parents, they fight over my affection. His dark brown hair. 10 times more than you, he says. uh, his dark brown hair splattered with blood, his humor-filled emerald eyes glassy and empty, his dark tan skin paling as the life faded from him. You guys are more like the kids than I am. No, yeah, no, yeah. I expect you guys to stop arguing and say, well, she started it. He refused he refused to allow that to happen, even as the bile rose in his throat. Marcus turned and ran in the opposite direction of the field. He knew the wolf was in pursuit because he could hear the branches snap beneath it. He did start. That's true, she did. uh, He could hear the branches snap beneath its giant paws and hear its anticipation-filled breathing. Marcus jumped over roots and trees as he tried to navigate his way through the dark, but he was only so fast, and he couldn't see where he was going. Trees rushed past him as he tried desperately to avoid running into one. The moon appeared to be mocking him by giving him just enough light for him to see it all, but not enough for him to really see where he was going. He felt the underbrush snag his foot. Fuck! And without hesitating, he jumped up and was back on his feet, running, but it was too late. The slowdown had been fatal. He felt the teeth rip into his leg, no doubt tearing muscles, tendons, and ligaments from their rightful places. Screaming at the horrible, ripping, tearing, searing pain, he would probably never walk on that leg again. Still desperate not to die brutally at the teeth of a wolf, he dragged himself forward with his arm. He'd never been good at army crawling, and he wished he'd practiced it more as a kid, but it was too late for that now. He didn't get 3 feet before the wolf was on him, this time biting into his shoulder. He felt it and heard it at the same time. Snap, crack, pop, crunch. It was instantly shattered and mangled. The pain was worse this time, and this time he could feel the pain sprouting from the shoulder throughout the rest of his body. He was certain he was seizing from shock when suddenly I was injured, and a dominant was on top of me, showing his superiority over me and newly turned. I tried my best to bare my neck, even though the dominant was on my back instead of my stomach like they usually would be. I whimpered my surrender. This seemed to appease my sire, and he began to lick at my wounds. They were horrible, and I knew that the dominant wouldn't heal them, even though he had the ability to. They were his mark, proof that he had changed me, and that any accomplishments I made using my newfound strength and abilities were really his accomplishments because he was the one who gave them to me. After cleaning my wounds, he left me there in pain, probably to tell his pack he had successfully turned someone, and if I survived the night, they could leave these forests. It was normal for werewolves to enter new territories to change 1 or 2 humans so the humans would start a new pack. I whimpered So those humans would start a new pack. I whimpered and wished that the dominant had stayed. It smelled like I was in foreign territory with no one to protect me, and since I didn't have nor want a mate, I was in even more danger. Staggering to my feet, I sniffed the air, looking for somewhere safe to rest for the night. I caught the scent of companionship and safety. Warm relief filled me as I limped towards the scent, barely keeping myself up. I reached a clearing and followed the scent to a strange little den-like thing. I wouldn't fit inside if I tried, even though I was smaller than most wolves, being a submissive. and a newly turned submissive at that. I decided just to collapse next to the thing, since the smell of protection and companionship was lingering inside. I collapsed to the ground with a whimper and waited for the moon to set before my long eyelids drooped and I fell into the arm. Before long, my eyelids drooped and I fell into the arms of Morpheus. Joey woke while it was still dark and the moon was setting over the horizon. Marcus? He asked, looking over at where the empty sleeping bag lay, where the empty sleeping bag lay, and then it all rushed back to him. Marcus! He shouted, rushing out of the tent, only to be met by the sleeping form of a huge white wolf. It was lying on its side, spread out as if in mid-leap. He would have thought it was dead if not for the heavy breathing he could hear and the faint whimpering. Suddenly, the sky got a little bit brighter, and the wolf began to shudder and shake. Joey thought he heard bones snapping, and then to his shock, Marcus was lying there, his leg mutilated and his shoulder missing a large chunk. His friend's clothes were missing, and he was breathing shallow, pained breaths. Whimpers escaped his mouth as he reached to touch his injured shoulder, only to pull away. Joey had no idea what he had just witnessed, but he knew it would have to wait until his friend wasn't bleeding out. Oh, Marcus, this is all my fault. I'm so sorry I fell asleep and... He was cut off by another whimper. Shaking the guilt away for now, he pulled out his phone and called 911. He had worked his way to the edge of the forest with his friend on his back by the time the ambulance arrived. Marcus wasn't bulky like some of the guys in their school, but he certainly wasn't tiny either. He had little muscle, but he was tall and lanky enough to be a hassle. Joey had abandoned all of their things in favor of carrying his best friend. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he watched the EMTs carry Marcus away. It was his fault Marcus was injured, and if he died, it would be his fault. He was the one who suggested this trip. He was the one who had insisted that there was nothing to worry about, and he was the one who wouldn't listen to his friend's fearful request that he call for help. He didn't know whether to be offended or not when the cops showed up. It should have been obvious that they would after he called 911, but he was too worried about his friend to want to answer questions about what they were doing in a restricted forest. He knew he had to, though. His friend would be blamed if he didn't take full responsibility. He didn't even know what to think about what he'd seen. He wanted so badly just to brush it off as a hallucination created from his sleep-addled brain, but he just couldn't. He had seen so clearly a giant white wolf turn into his best friend. How was he supposed to react to something like that? Well, however he was supposed to do it, he would have to do it later. Right now, he had to deal with the authorities. Young man, you're the one who called in the animal attack, yes? The man in the uniform asked, and Joey nodded solemnly. Well, what were you two doing out there? Joey steeled his determination, and later he would reflect this was probably most mature thing he'd ever done in his life. Oh, that this was the most maturity he'd ever shown in his life. It was my idea, sir. I was so curious about the animal attacks, and we used to camp out here when we were younger. I thought we'd be fine, but Marcus kept insisting that we shouldn't have done this. But I practically dragged him into it. Then he told me he was going to go pee, and that I was supposed to call for help if he hadn't come back in 30 minutes. But I fell asleep. The next morning, he trailed off, unsure how to explain what he had saw, or even if he should explain it to the officer but the officer chose for him. The next morning, you found him injured? Joey just nodded, tears burning his eyes. It was all his fault. Poor Marcus, who'd never hurt a soul and just sat in the back of the room thinking. The officer wrote something down on his notepad and lifted his head to look at Joey again before asking, Did you see the animal, or tracks, or anything? Joey shook his head, despite the image of a white wolf flashing it. Probably not important. Despite the image of the white wolf flashing in his head. I was too scared about Marcus. I just called 911 and ran out to meet the ambulance. The officer seemed disappointed, but resigned, like he'd expected that. Okay then, if you remember anything you think we should know, just stop by the building on Shearing Road. Jerry nodded. He knew where the police station was located. He walked back to his house, and instead of going inside and facing his father's wrath, he hopped into his father's car, and using his spare set of keys, started it up. He drove to the hospital and waited anxiously for information on Marcus. When Marcus woke up, he was in a hospital bed. He could tell because he could feel the springs digging into his back like they had when he'd broken his arm. He looked around the room and saw his friend next to his bed. He wondered why he was there to begin with, as he sat up and didn't feel any pain. When he looked, he saw his shoulder, and it all came rushing back. He gasped. When he looked down and saw his shoulder, it all came rushing back. Ooh, some minor edits. Marcus kept, the last thing he remembered was his shoulder being bitten, and then just vague feelings. Fear most prominently, but then relief and safety. Marcus? Marcus, you're awake! Thank God, man, do you remember anything? Joey eagerly questioned once he woke. Marcus nodded subtly. I remember going to use the bathroom at the edge of the clearing. There was a wolf there, so I ran and ended up further into the forest. I tripped, and it bit me. Twice, I think. I remember the pain, and then it's all blurry. Like just vague feelings of fear and then relief, he confessed. He was glad Joey was there to listen, because he felt strange and scared about it all. Joey, how did you find me? Could swear I was somewhere in the middle of the forest when I was bitten. And speaking of that, what kind of painkillers do they have me on? Not on me. Me on. Oop. I remember the worst pain of my life. I thought it was dying, and now I hardly feel any pain at all. Not to mention, I have a killer headache. Marcus's confusion was growing by the second. Joey sighed heavily and opened his mouth, as if he was about to tell some terrible secret, when there was a knock on the door. Joey mouthed later at Marcus, and Marcus nodded hesitantly before speaking. Come in, out loud. A man in blue scrubs walked in and went over to the sink occupying the room to wash his hands and put on a pair of gloves. Mr. Leroy, I need to look you over for any permanent damage that may have been caused by the attack. That thing, whatever it is, took a pretty big bite out of you. Actually, he took two, if this file is correct. The nurse slowly approached the bed. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, can you tell me how bad the pain is? If it's unbearable, we can put you to sleep while we examine the injuries so it doesn't hurt when we move you around. The nurse thought it was remarkable the boy was even conscious. The initial exam from the EMPs had listed muscle tears, missing tendons, and shattered bones. This kid appeared fine. Marcus responded a little hesitantly, finally realizing how unnatural it was. I never keep the same I never keep the same tenses when I write. I actually switch from past tense to present tense very frequently. I'm gonna go with was. It probably was. Finally realizing how unnatural it was for him to not be feeling any pain. Alone, I guess. Honestly, I can't feel any pain. Said, and the nurse's eyes narrowed suspiciously. The man walked over to the bed and approached Marcus. He pulled the hospital gown down off Marcus's shoulder and examined the bite mark, which had scarred over already. That's impossible, the nurse exclaimed. You're completely healed. This wound looks months old. I need to speak to the doctor. You wait here. I promise I'll be right back. The nurse fled the room, muttering himself into a flurry. Joey had no plans to wait for the doctor to come back. Come on, Marcus, we're getting out of here, Joey stated, grabbing his friend's clothes and handing them over. But is that allowed? Marcus asked warily. Joey was acting deadly serious, which was completely out of character. Doesn't matter. I don't trust them not to test you like a lab rat. Marcus shuddered at his friend's tone. Marcus didn't think the hospital even had the resources to do much more than an x-ray or a simple blood test, but Zoe had a look in his eye that said he wouldn't be swayed. As they walked from the hospital, Marcus's headache just continued to grow. Why was everything so loud, so bright? The smell of disinfectant burnt his nose and made his eyes water. When he sat down in Joey's car, he breathed a sigh of relief. It smelled familiar, and his brain associated this smell with friendship and good times. Did the hospital change to a stronger disinfectant? The smell was suffocating, and my head is killing me. I think it must be the drugs they had me on. Everything was just too loud and too bright. Weird about that healing thing, right? They aren't going to hunt me down and experiment on me or anything, right? I mean, I don't really think the doctors are allowed to do anything like that, but you sounded really worried, and I remember how painful it was. I don't think I could ever forget. And now he actually heard his friend's nervous swallow and the shake in his laugh. Relax, Marcus. I'm sure everything will be fine. But even as he said it, Marcus watched the welcome to Linktown sign go by. Are we supposed to leave town before the cops question me? And where are we going? Marcus quizzed, his voice significantly quieter now. His friend's words always reassured him, and he rarely ever doubted Joey when he said everything would be okay. Of course, this last time Joey had said that, Marcus was mauled by a giant wolf. The police are letting us off on a warning. They have more important things to deal with than a few kids wanting to go camping. I'm taking us to the old church so we can discuss what happened in private and, Joey coughed here, his insecurity about what he was going to confess choking him up a bit, in a non-judgmental environment. At this, Marcus raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. The church wasn't far out of town, just a mile or so, and so they arrived quickly. The building was falling apart, and Marcus had often worried it would collapse when they first started going there. Most of the windows were shattered and boarded up, and the paint was chipped away to the point where the building was more brown than white. They both exited the vehicle and walked around to the back where the largest broken window resided. They had pulled the boards from that window a few years ago when they had first found the place. They both crawled into the church and went to sit where they usually sat, on the risers where the choir no doubt sang. Once they both had settled, silence reigned, and while Marcus was perfectly comfortable with the silence and reveled in it, Joey was getting increasingly nervous. He wasn't crazy, right? Maybe his mind had just been so shocked at the image of his friend brutally mauled that he saw something that wasn't real. It would make more sense than the alternative. I gotta stretch out my legs. Marcus could actually feel Marcus could actually hear his friend's heart beating. And while that was disconcerting, he needed to focus on one thing at a time. Joey, you wanted to talk about something, right? That's why we're here? As if he'd as if he'd been stuck underwater for the longest time and was just reaching the surface, Joey sucked in a sharp breath. Okay, this is going to sound crazy, and I'm not really sure where to start, and I have some really weird theories, and Joey, calm down. I promise to hear you out, and I promise to take you 100% seriously, regardless of how crazy you sound. So just breathe. Marcus was starting to worry. Despite being playful and boisterous, Joey was a pretty level-headed person and was usually the one having to calm Marcus down from one of his numerous panic attacks. Marcus had never seen Joey in all of the 5 years they'd been friends break down like this. He heard Joey taking deep breaths, and he could hear his friend's heart slowing back to just above the normal rate instead of around 130 beats per minute. So after you left, I accidentally fell back asleep, and I woke up again just before sunrise. I was so worried that something had happened to you because I'd fallen asleep, so I left the tent to look for you, but he took a shuddering breath. Oh my goodness, I need to take a drink of water. Ugh, okay, we're back. So after you left, when I he took a shuddering breath. When I looked out of the tent, there was a huge wolf lying on the ground. Seemed dead asleep on its side. I thought it might have been shot for the shortest of moments because dogs don't sleep like that. Then the sun began to rise and I heard the most horrible sound. I couldn't process it at the time, but now it keeps playing over in my head. It sounded like bones breaking. He stopped for a moment and took a few more gulping breaths. And then you were lying there, in the same position the wolf had been. Your shoulder was ripped open and your leg, oh God, your leg. Marcus was beyond shocked, and now he knew why his friend had freaked out so much. It really did sound like a crazy story. Marcus pulled his friend into a hug and just held him there for a few moments, knowing that when Joey was aware again, he'd be incredibly embarrassed. And all I could think was, I can't believe I fell asleep. I was in shock and I knew I had to call 911. The cops questioned me and I didn't know what to say. It's not like I could just up and say, oh yeah, and by the way, when I woke up this morning, my best friend was a giant hulking wolf. Then when you woke up, you were basically healed, and it's barely been 5 hours. Over you were talking in the hospital like everything was louder, smellier, and brighter, and I can't help but think that maybe, just possibly, Joey didn't say what he was thinking, but Marcus had already thought of the same thing. Marcus had been bitten twice by a wolf much, much larger than average on the night of a full moon, and his friend had seen them in the form of a wolf the next morning. His senses were heightened, and the bite had been healed at an unprecedented rate. He was a shut-in himself, and he'd read enough fantastical stories to have heard of a werewolf. If this is real, and I'm a werewolf, What are we going to do? I mean, what if I turn into a beast like the one that bit me next full moon? I don't even remember what I did last night. I just remember feeling scared and lonely and then hopeful and safe. I have no idea what that means. We don't even know if this is real. For all we know, we're both crazy. Not that that's such a better option. I just don't know what to do. What if I turn out to be a monster? Marcus was scared. What if he turned into an evil monster every full moon? What if he hurt someone? Shockingly, or maybe not so shockingly, seeing his friend panic like this allowed Joey to put himself back together. He was so used to being there for Marcus and being the strong one, the familiar friend of his, the familiar sound of his friend's nervous ramblings was like a shock to his system. Immediately, he pulled himself together and backed out of his friend's embrace. He slowly began to talk Marcus down. It doesn't matter right now, and I'll be there, and we can work it out together. It doesn't matter right now, I'll be there, and we can work it out together. If we need to, we can chain you down with silver or something. Everything will be fine. We will get through this together, just like every other problem we've been faced with. So, they set to planning for the next full moon, often remarking to each other how insane and ridiculous this was. They planned to go to Joey's house because he had an outdoor cellar and was closer to the forest, and either chaining him in a cellar all night or letting him run into the woods. It depended on whether the wolf seemed tame or not. Whether they used silver or not depended on how it affected Marcus, and on whether they could find silver chains. It was with these plans in mind, and feeling significantly less frazzled, that they returned home and slept, knowing they have school the next day. Ain't nobody here to redeem hydrate, so I shall hydrate on my own. When Marcus woke up, he could feel a slight change in the way he felt. It took a minute for him to figure out what it was. He felt just a bit more at home in his body, and he didn't feel the crushing weight of depression that usually followed first waking up. In fact, he only woke up and left his bed once. In fact, he usually only woke up and left his bed once Joey got there to drag him out of bed. But today, he felt stronger and bursting with energy. He opened the curtains only to be shocked to find that it was still pitch black outside. Glancing at his clock showed it was 4 a.m. on the dot. He just stood there gaping for a moment and mourned the loss of sleep. God knew he wouldn't be able to get back to sleep when he was feeling so excited. When he looked out the window, he felt the strangest urge to go for a run. It wasn't that crazy. Marcus had never, ever wanted to exercise in his life. He had always felt so tired of life, and his lethargy made even the thought of exercise sickening. Not to mention his anxiety would usually pull at his nerves for even considering leaving the house while it was still dark. But he didn't feel any of that. He only felt eager and happy about the idea. Even without even without even with how crazy this all felt, he still followed his new instincts. After putting on his gym shoes, he snuck out the door carefully so as not to wake his dad. Once he was outside, he didn't actually know where to run, having never done this before, but he decided if his instincts had gotten him this far, they could take him the rest of the way. So he chose a random direction and began to jog. But when this felt unsatisfying, he steadily began to increase his speed. He didn't know how, but somehow he ended up sprinting through the woods. He didn't know if they were in the western woods or the eastern woods. He wasn't paying that much attention. He leaped over logs and dodged around trees and felt more alive than he had in a long time. When he came to a stop, his chest physically hurt like he was being stabbed. His sides felt the same. His legs were cramping and he couldn't get any air into his lungs, and he was sweating enough to fill a pool, but he felt great. Euphoric even. Obviously, his body wasn't cut out for running like that, but it felt amazing. He was laughing at this point, feeling so elated and overjoyed for the first time in a long time. Being around Joy Being around Joey had gotten rid of the loneliness and helped with the depression a little bit, but nothing like this. When the when the sun began to peek over the horizon, he began to walk back home, still giggling slightly. When he got there, he saw Joey's car in the drive. He giggled just a little bit more before jogging up the steps to his room where he found Joey waiting. Jesus, did you just jump in a pool or something? Joey asked, shocked. He had never seen Marcus show any interest in exercise. In fact, he was under the impression that Marcus hated it. Upon taking a closer look, Joey noticed the joy pulsing off of his friend, and was a bit shocked. He was happy for his friend, but he was almost unrecognizable without the overwhelming aura of fear and sadness clouding over him. If he hadn't known Marcus already, he would have thought he'd always been this happy. You'd never know looking at him now that just a few days earlier he was insecure and depressed. Joey, you can't even begin to comprehend what I just experienced. It was amazing. I woke up today all on my own at like 4 in the morning and was just full of bottled up energy. And then I wanted to go running, so I did, and it was awesome. I was going so fast I felt like I was flying, and somehow I ended up in the eastern forest. I didn't even realize until I was walking back. And running was so easy, even as my legs felt like jelly and my heart was beating out of my chest. I thought I was having a heart attack, but like in a good way, and it was just great. Joey was struck by how much this sounded like Marcus's panic rambling, yet the nervous edge was replaced with joy and energy. He couldn't help but let out a startled laugh. His friend was happy, really happy, and he couldn't help but let his friend's contagious joy overcome him. Marcus took a shower and brushed his teeth. Usually he would have combed his short black hair over his face for a few minutes and worried about how people would react if he showed up at school with bedhead, but today he felt a bit more confident and decided to leave it alone. He was about to put the deodorant he usually wore on when he caught a whiff of it. "Oh God, this reeks!" he said, holding it away from him and covering his nose. Joey walked in and laughed at him a bit. After thoroughly enjoying his friend's predicament, Joey suggested they stop by the market on the way to school and pick up some scentless deodorant. Marcus nodded his head and chucked the thing into the chest. While this might not seem like much to most people, Joey knew his friend's aim and hand-eye coordination and basic ability to do things like this used to be laughable. Literally, he could be standing right next to the trash and trying to drop something in, and would still miss by a foot. Joey would usually laugh hysterically at such things before reassuring Marcus that he didn't think any less of him. When they were younger and Joey had first become friends with Marcus, his friend had been terrified that he would be incompetent or unable to keep his new friend, though he had never showed these worries on his face, which was probably why he didn't even notice his friend had insecurities like that until he had broken down about not being able to reach a board game on the top shelf and repeatedly stating how worthless he was, and how nobody would really want to be his friend. After this incident, Joey was careful how he responded to little failures or mix-ups with Marcus. They both walked down the stairs, tiptoeing in an attempt not to wake Marcus's father, but when they got down the stairs, they already saw the man sitting there, drinking his coffee and staring absently at the third chair at the table. Marcus's father, Dave, did things like that often. Marcus's mother, Julie, had died giving birth to him, and although Dave loved his son more than anything in the world, he missed her every day. He would remember her in the little things he did every day that just weren't the same without her. Things like coffee in the morning or watching TV in the afternoon. He tried really hard not to let it get to him too much, though, because he wanted to be there for his son. He had repeatedly made it clear to Marcus that his mother's death had nothing to do with him, but he knew his son still, for whatever reason, blamed himself just a bit. He turned when he heard the boys coming down the stairs and smiled at them. "Have a great day at school, kids." Marcus nodded to him with a minuscule smile, and Joey beamed brightly as usual and saluted Dave. "You too, sir," he chirped, and they were off to off to school, that is. I use these little line breaks to clear my throat and take a drink and stuff. Short breaks, you know. Marcus felt his mysteriously absent anxiety return once they pulled up to the school. He was glad he'd put on odorless deodorant now, although he would like to point out that it was not actually odorless and instead smelled like chalk dust. He tried a bit desperately to flatten his messy hair he had neglected to comb, and ignored how they sounded so loud. Everything was so intense. Body odor, perfume, and cologne filled the air, and he felt like he should be wearing a gas mask. And on top of that, they were all so loud. He felt his breathing quicken as the inevitable panic attack began. Marcus, breathe! Here! There's, no, that's not right. Here, there you go. Marcus looked over at Joey, who was holding out a pair of orange earplugs. I remember you talking about the hospital when I saw the. I remember you talking about the hospital, and when I saw the. And I saw these when we stopped to pick up the. I remembered you talking about the hospital. I saw these when we stopped to pick up the deodorant and thought they might help, Joey said, and Marcus took deep breaths to steady himself. Boop boop, little editing here and there. He could tell that though they'd just pushed off the inevitable. He could tell though that they'd just pushed off the inevitable. He would probably have a panic attack at the very least once today. Marcus nodded at his friend in thanks and put in the earplugs. They muffled the sound a little bit, but it was still pretty loud. He had never appreciated how out of the way his house was until now. God forbid he'd have to hear noises like this. He'd have to hear noise like this every night before he goes to bed. Marcus had always thought living a few blocks away from school would make his life easier. Being the incredibly lazy person he was, he wouldn't want to live right. Being the incredibly lazy person he was, he wouldn't want to live right across the street from the school because then it would be right there all the time to remind him of his anxiety. When they stepped out of the car, it all got 5 times worse, and he wanted to take a deep breath to calm down, but at the same time he worried breathing in that toxic teenage stink would kill him. Joey's hand on his shoulder brought him back to reality, and if he focused, he could pick out Joey's scent among little editing here and there. He could pick out Joey's scent from the crowd, which was a huge comfort. Entering the crowded school made it even worse. He could see the sweat dripping from the guys, and he thought that he might suffocate from the smell of perfume and a stuffy scent he assumed came from the makeup painted across the girls' faces. It was disgusting and overwhelming. But Joey's presence at his side made getting to his locker infinitely easier than if he had been alone. Marcus was too focused on the sights, scents, and sounds to notice it, but Joey certainly noticed how nobody purposely bumped into Marcus today. He also noticed the admiring looks he was getting from the ladies. This was strange, considering the only visible difference about Marcus was his messy hair and scentless deodorant. Maybe the girls had some kind of intuition about his slightly raised confidence. He was just as curious about the change as he was about it for his friend. Though Joey wasn't exactly sure Marcus noticed girls, or anyone for that matter, Joey saw things in Marcus that Marcus didn't notice. Like he noticed how although Marcus says he doesn't have a favorite color, his gaze always lingered on blue, and when he ate pizza, he ate more like he was hungry and less like he was forcing himself to eat something. The fact that Marcus seemed less interested in people was just another one of those things he noticed. Joey assumed it might be the result of being ignored by his peers, so maybe this would bring him out of his shell. Joey would support his friend regardless of what he liked, if he liked anyone. Joey himself was 100% into females, but that didn't mean he couldn't be supportive of people different from himself. When they arrived at Marcus's locker, the first one brave enough to approach did just that. Hi, Marcus, was it? I just wanted you to know that if you ever wanted to hang out or anything, I'm always free. The girl had short, curly blonde hair and hazel eyes, and who Marcus was pretty sure was one of the popular girls. She was wearing a light layer of makeup. Joey thought it seemed like nothing, but to Marcus it looked like she had painted her face bronze, and her flowery perfume, like most girls, was suffocating. He looked up and felt specifically very shy for some reason. And then it hit him. Like a train. His glasses. He'd left them at home because he hadn't felt the need to bring them on his run, and he'd been too distracted by his newfound energy to remember to put them on. Thanks, I guess, he said before quickly grabbing his things, including Joey's hand, and sped away. Marcus pulled Joey into a secluded corner and began to frantically whisper, I forgot my glasses. What am I going to do? I thought everyone was staring a bit more than usual, but I thought it was because of my messy hair, not because I don't have my glasses on. What am I going to do? What if the teachers find out that I don't really need them and make me take them off during class? What if they call on me to read in front of the whole class? I can't do that. I've never been good in front of crowds. And Marcus, take a deep breath. You were fine earlier, weren't you? You were excited and happy. If you could do it then, can't you do it here? People obviously like your new look. In fact, I bet Chloe thought you looked attractive. That's the first time in a long time someone other than me has invited you to something, right? I think maybe those glasses were doing you more harm than good, and it's important to step out of our comfort zones every once in a while. I know you can do it, Marcus. You survived a wolf attack. Of course you can make it through one day without your glasses. Joey prayed this inspired his friend. As much as he hated the idea of his friend having less time for him, he knew his friend needed the ability to interact with others socially if he was going to survive in the real world. idea of anyone finding him attractive made him distinctly uncomfortable, and he shifted a little bit. But Marcus also felt like he did after every motivational video he'd ever seen. He felt like he wanted to do something, but he knew in the back of his mind he couldn't do it. He was worried and confident, his anxiety clashing violently with his desire to impress Joey. In the end, he took a deep breath and decided to try and brave the day without his glasses. With newfound determination, Marcus nodded his head and turned to lead the way to their first class. A rare occurrence, of course, because Marcus often hides behind Joey when they walk through the halls. He took his seat, a determined stare painted across his features. When their peers stepped into the room, they could instantly tell the difference. They all cast furtive glances at Marcus, all wondering if it was the same boy who radiated anxiety and depression so much that they began to experience it as well. It may seem like an overreaction to most, but Marcus had been a creepy, quiet kid with his shoulders slumped and his head down since kinder. So of course everyone would be shocked when one day he just confidently strides down the hall, shoulders back and head held high. The teacher entered the class with an unfamiliar girl following behind him. She had long straight-black hair flowing past her hips and cold green eyes that glinted something dangerous. Her face was impassive and almost empty-looking. She wasn't wearing any makeup, but her pale face was completely blemish-free. If anyone asked Marcus, he would have told them that he thought it was because even Freckles and Zitz were afraid of that resting bitch face. Well, he actually would have mumbled something about a really, really good skin cream, but he'd be thinking about scary bitch face. She stood with confidence that matched and maybe even exceeded Chloe's, but it was a different kind of confidence. Chloe's was the normal, I'm a social teenager confidence. This girl was more like, I'm completely above everyone in this room and entirely sure I could beat every single one of these peons in anything with little to no effort kind of confidence. Marcus felt uneasy just being in the same room as her. The instincts were screaming at him that this girl was really bad news. Mr. Brown turned a glance at the stoic girl and muttered to her, Introduce yourself and take a seat next to. He hesitated and glanced around the room. There were a few separate empty seats, one next to Marcus, because Joey could only take up one desk, and even with Marcus's new confidence, the students were avoiding taking a permanent seat next to the weirdo, and another next to Charity, one very kind and sweet girl, befitting her name, with long blonde hair and baby blue eyes that were much brighter than Marcus's. Feeling impressed with the new confidence coming off of one of his most subdued students, decided to encourage the behavior by giving him a chance to socialize with the new student, Marcus, in the front. Marcus just barely resisted the urge to sink down into his seat and whimper like a wounded puppy. This was going to end badly. He wasn't sure how, but he knew it was. Hello, my name is Catherine. You are? The girl asked. Her voice was just as cold as her icy green eyes. He glanced to his right and saw Joey smiling encouragingly at him. So Marcus swallowed his irrational fear and introduced himself. I'm Marcus. It's nice to meet you, he said in a low, stable voice. It was easier to keep his stutter away than he was used to, especially in such a daunting situation. But he assumed that, much like this morning, it had something to do with werewolves. Her lips twitched in a tiny, fleeting smirk. Marcus couldn't tell if it was meant to be friendly or threatening. Ugh, times when I read like this because I don't talk much in like regular IRL situations. When I read like this, air gets trapped in my throat because my muscles, they just aren't used to it. So, like in my chest and my throat, there'll get like air bubbles in it. I'll pound on my chest to dislodge it. The rest of the school day continued on relatively positively. Sometimes a person would approach, talk to Marcus. He stumbled his way through conversations blindly, but nobody seemed to notice his social awkwardness. His lack of stutter certainly helped. And that's all I have written on this one. The plan for it, if you haven't noticed, Catherine, this new girl, don't know where it could have gotten that awesome name from for this character. Could you tell that I like the name Catherine? Could you tell? I don't know. I think I hide it very well. But just in case you didn't notice, I like the name Catherine. she's gonna be an antagonist. She's gonna be like a werewolf hunter, a supernatural hunter, or something like that. And I'm thinking that maybe, although she'd start with an antagonistic relationship with Joey, eventually Joey and her would fall in love, and that would cause more conflict between Joey and Marcus, because of course Joey is, or because of course, Marcus is a vampire and therefore doesn't want to hang out with or not vampire, is a werewolf, and doesn't want to hang out with a werewolf hunter, stuff like that. This next one I'm probably not gonna read. This one's just an excuse to use a language I made up, so it's not really understandable. I mean, I guess I could do it and translate it. Sure, I guess I could do that. So this is the beginning. It's supposed to be an intro, and then, like, it's not important. This is just, like, to get to the later scene. It doesn't actually get to the later scene. Senna sat on her throne with a carefully impassive face, waiting for the prisoners to be brought in by her guard. Her left-hand lady, Lex, was just behind her, keeping watch over the tense room. Ambassadors from other societies lined the walls of her room. All of them were carefully relaxed, none of them wanting to seem more tense than the others. Finally, the door opened with a bang, and two guards marched in with the prisoner. She was wearing gray rags and had messy black hair. Her head hung lowly in submission. Agog, you string a port legain ici pour vous. Translation, leader, we bound and carried the girl here for you, the guard announced with a low bow. Who got more ducks? Much thanks. Soldier, strong person, deadly. It's death leader, so it's somebody who, like, leads people to death. It's like a soldier. These are, actually, this language is made using stem words like Greek and Latin stems, and then French mixed in, to make up for when there aren't any stems. Senna responded. Her voice echoed around the room, and the guard tried to hide his beaming smile at her praise. Gain, quel vous nom? Senna finally addressed the prisoner. This is girl or woman. What is your name? This is French. Quel vous is French, but nim is stem for name. Senna finally addressed the prisoner. She was met with silence, and her mouth twitched unpleasantly. Parle, which is speak, and therefore should be italicized because it's in the other language. Yes, can I? Oh, you cannot. Okay. Carl, she commanded. Several of the present ambassadors shivered in slight fear. The prisoner lifted her head and trembling and finally spoke. I'm sorry, I don't understand you. Senna raised her brow slightly in surprise. She had never heard this dialect before. Lex, quel glot el parle, which Lex, that's a name. This is French for what? This is the stem for tongue or language. This is she, those are both in and parle, which is in French. Or it can also be a stem, actually. Parle, yeah, this is actually the stem parle, which means speak. If it had an E on the end, then it would be French for speak. French kind of took that from Greek and Latin stems. So altogether, it's, what language is she speaking? She asked the woman behind her throne. Lex only looked at her in confusion. Ego pas dict se lingui. This is, I don't speak this language. Or I don't speak this tongue. Lingui is also tongue. Glot and lingui are synonyms. They mean the exact same thing. Ego means I. And then pa and dict, or no, dict is speak, but pa is no in French, and say is this in French. He responded with a bewildered and disgruntled expression. This caused hushed whispers to break out across the room. Stop, Harl! Just stop talking or shut up. At Senna's order, silence descended upon the room. Omni ex, which everyone out. Everyone paused slightly, as if they didn't know whether they'd heard her right. Slowly, the ambassadors walked from the room, several seeming to just barely hold in their progress. Et vous, Lex, which is, and you, Lex. Lex startled, looking at Fenna in shock. When Fenna was unmoving, she nodded and began to leave. The guards began reaching for the prisoner, but Fenna stopped them. Exosanguin, which is without the girl. Yeah. Or it's out with the girl? I can't remember what these stems are. They glanced at the leader, saw her resolve, and nodded before leaving. Once the room was empty, Thenna rose from her throne and descended the stairs to the trembling prisoner. She sat in front of the woman. Frustratingly, the girl seemed determined to keep her eyes on the floor. Scope acro. Thenna used her hand to push the girl's chin up. This means look up. So, look up. Thenna used her hand to push the girl's chin up. Now they could both see each other. What do you want from me? The prisoner asked. Of course, Thenna didn't understand her. Instead, Thenna just pointed at her chest. Ego ne magag Thenna. My name is Leader Thenna. She paused briefly to point at the prisoner's chest. Heles Vunim. What is your name? The prisoner still seemed lost. Thenna grumbled to herself before trying again. Pointing at herself, she said, Thenna. Then she pointed at the prisoner. The prisoner seemed to finally catch on. Oh, Pluto! I'm Pluto, she introduced. Thenna caught on quickly. Thenna nodded. Vus homo dict post ego. You speak the same as I? Your same spoke after I. Oh, you repeat after me. You say the same as I do after. She paused, and the air was thick with confusion. Pluto clearly was still clueless. Ego named Pluto. Pluto. Thenna said slowly before pointing at Pluto. The girl remained silent, not understanding. Thenna repeated herself slower, all while she stayed pointing at Pluto. Ego nim Pluto. Finally, Pluto got it, and she repeated, Ego nim Pluto. Thenna smiled approvingly. Plubene, which is more good, very good. Thenna came to the conclusion that if she wanted to interrogate the woman, she would first need to teach her their language. Standing, Thenna cut the ropes, tying the prisoner's feet together, but left the bindings on her wrists. Waving for the girl to stand and follow her, Thenna commanded, Ven, which is come. There we go! I did it! It's actually really fun to experiment with that language. I've been trying it for a while. It's actually pretty difficult to write it, but it's fun to read it later because you feel like you're translating as you go. This one is a abusive trans story, but I kind of don't want to read it because, like, I'm not trans and therefore I don't actually understand what they're going from. So, yeah. This one's short. This one's meh. I guess I could read. It's not great. It's very unremarkable. I forget about it every time I'm not looking at the paper. I kind of want to skip through to the good ones, but I guess you guys would be curious if I just skipped over it. Ugh. I was an observer, though others would tell you I was slow. Speech has always been in my capabilities. I simply detest the very thought of it. My schooling was short, as the lecturers despised my silence. The more I refused to join class discussion, the harder the teacher would push me to. Young as I was, my obstinate will regarding the matter would never falter. Eventually, they gave up, and my education was denied to me. Man, using some big words for this character. I guess he has a very, intense dialect. He just speaks in a very proper way, I guess. He frightens the other children and refuses to participate in class. He simply cannot attend here any longer. This declaration was the deciding factor for my parents. I must be dull. With this in mind, I was set to do manual labor. Not that we were poor, but we certainly weren't wealthy enough to own a slave or employ a servant. This takes place in olden times, that's why. It became my job to complete the miserable tasks my siblings and parents refused to. As a silent, stupid worker, it was easy to fall into the background. No person blinks twice when a servant is mopping nearby. They continue their business as usual. It rapidly became a hobby of mine to watch people, to take in the details of their faces, the small twitches here and there, and the flippant way their hands would move in conversation. I learned the secret language a person's standing or sitting position hold. Watching people's feet was a favorite of mine. Ah! Sorry, that probably deafened your ears. Hold on, let me turn the notifications on my phone all the way down. Yeah, there we go. Oh, down. There we go. My nose, it's leaking. I don't know why. There's no cats in here. Is there a cat in here? Did a cat sneak into my room and it's like hiding under my bed or something? Watching people's feet was a favorite of mine. As a worker, I was meant to keep my eyes to the ground, and feet were the easiest to see. How people walked, how they stood, where their feet pointed, and what kinds of shoes they wore. These details gave a world of knowledge to me that was inaccessible to others. The thought of becoming a detective had not once crossed my overstocked mind. My life was filled with contentment, just simply being left to my own devices so I could watch the people around me. It never crossed my mind, that is, until I saw something extremely peculiar while on a trip to the market. A neighbor of my family who frequently visited, whom I easily recognized by his glossy brown loafers, was being arrested for murder. He cried desperately it wasn't him. He wailed that he was innocent to the masses. By the movement of his shoulders and the scraping of his feet, I could easily see plain as day that he was innocent. I considered informing the kind detectives of this information, but I knew it wasn't my place. The officers would never believe a servant's word over whatever evidence they had. On top of that, I'd have to talk. I'd also considered the option of just meandering on my way and pushing the incident from my mind. But in spite of my best efforts, the man's cries played over and over in my ears, blocking out my other thoughts. I heard him while I was mopping the kitchen. Oh, it was gonna continue. I heard him while I was mopping the kitchen. I heard him while I was cleaning the bathroom. And yeah. That's all that I've written so far on this one. This one is, as you can tell by the title, the craziest prompt you could come up with on short notice. I thought to myself, what is the weirdest thing I could do to start a story? And this is what happened. Air bubbles in my chest again. Uh, Now, I know what you're going to say. How could you possibly ever accidentally wander into some kind of freaky war between demons, zombies, and angels, kill everyone, and fall into a black hole leading to the gates of heaven? But I swear to the zombie lord Zoraroth, it wasn't on purpose. This is probably all sounding very confusing, so maybe I should probably start from the beginning. It all started on the day of the science fair, which just so happened to also fall on Valentine's Day. The rest of it's not really important. Ooh, okay, so this one's actually almost done. Holy crap, it's hot in here. I'm gonna turn off my light, open my window. Yeah, window, turn off the light, off my legs, my legs. Not easy. Oh, gosh. Well, that was a fun process. Okay, slash Revenge, a Game of Thrones fic-ish. It's not really Game of Thrones, it's just kind of like what I imagined Game of Thrones to kind of be like. The medieval, slightly like, yeah, the medieval kind of setting. Mine is not, it's not actually related to Games of Thrones at all. That's just what I thought of when I thought of it. These are translations that don't really matter that much. I guess I have the ones that I would worry about. The City of Promise, Prometra, the City of Making, Maera Shridao, the City of Shadow. As I take in the sight of my fallen kin, rage pulls itself from the deepest corners of my soul. It pours from me in a howl to the gods. In the raw, shaking tenor of my voice is a promise of vengeance. A promise to look down on the Myrian king and watch him choke on his own blood after killing his entire army. Locus will not escape my wrath, and neither will all those he calls kin. I, Helicika Prometra, queen of the Prometrians, will avenge this travesty. It has been 56 days since the slaughter of my people, and I have finally reached the border of my Yure. I have changed my hair and covered my visage with dirt. I have changed into the rags of a vagabond and left my shoes on the battlefield. Nights have been cold and I have been hungry, but I learnt to hunt with my bare hands when I was a youth. No one will question me here. People journey to my Yuri to make something of their lives, to be bigger than they were. The border patrol doesn't glance at me any longer than it takes to sneer at my dirtied appearance. Not a single one of the Myrians suspect that any of us survived. They would never guess that the last survivor of the Prometrians was directly beneath their noses, nor that she was the king. Their naivety will be my security. It has been 59 days since the slaughter. I have procured a space to live and will leave to hunt soon, so I have skins and food to trade. I will also collect deadly herbs. I will blend with the people, and in a few days the killings will start. The Myrians are unaware the Prometrians had an alliance with the Shridaeans. I have been trained in the art of deception and invisibility. There are no better there are no better assassins than the people of Shridao, and I have been trained by them. I will wipe out the entirety of my Yuri before they even know I exist. It has been 64 days since the slaughter. I approach my first target, a youth. No one heard me enter. I am silent on my feet, and my presence is undetectable. Looking at the girl before me, I think of the youth taken from Prometra, sent to the other side before their time. I think of the families ruthlessly massacred, and it's easy to dump the herbs down the youth's throat. I whisper, almost silently into her ear before I leave. May your journey to the other side be peaceful, and may the gods welcome you with joy. The verse is writing thing. I know that nobody probably cares, but I'm really proud of this section right here. Uh, this is I started without saying it's been blank days since the slaughter because this isn't a part of the story. This is just a cut in. The first time I saw him, something hitched in my chest, something that whispered softly into my ear that he would be the death of me. I ignored it. And then back to the regularly scheduled programming. It has been 109 days since the slaughter. The Myrians are convinced a plague has overtaken them. Most of the youth are either dead or sick, and the adults are starting to fall as well. It brings me great joy to see them look at their king for guidance in these difficult times. I would like to use a bloodier method, but I can't risk giving myself away. I'm the only person who can seek vengeance. Everyone else is dead. I turn my thoughts back to the present when I hear footsteps. A man is approaching. His clothes are that of a commoner, but it is blatantly obvious that from the way that he holds himself, he comes from status. His chin is held high, his back is straight, and he walks with a confidence that tells anyone with eyes he feels entitled to the ground he walks on. I resist the urge to snarl at him. Here he stands, a noble who has been living lavishly. How dare he waste the precious time on this earth his people had so ruthlessly ripped away from my people? I serve him reluctantly. It has been 124 days since the slaughter. Now adults are dying off as fast as the youth. I had made sure to cull as many of the youth as possible, as fast as possible. The king has asked people to do their best to reproduce, but that will not save his people. I have no sympathy for newborns or carriers. The gentleman has visited my shop frequently. For a while I worried he had discovered me, but the more often he came, the more I saw that this wasn't the case. Also, there should be a paragraph here, new paragraph. The more often he came, the more I saw this wasn't the case. The man eyes me with carnal hunger. Greedy noble he is, he must think himself entitled to me as well. He is partially right in the fact that I wouldn't deny him if he propositioned me. I don't have the luxury of making enemies here. Someone of his stature might take immediate offense to rejection, pretending to be a peasant or not. For now, though, I will simply serve him the goods he buys, and put him from my thoughts otherwise. 179 days have passed since the slaughter. The sickness has begun spreading to the nobles and those of the higher court. Now the Mierians are really beginning to panic. I visit up to 27 homes a night. I no longer just infect the youth, I poison every inhabitant. I was correct in my prediction of the man. He has taken me to my bed on the last moon. We haven't exchanged titles, they aren't needed. He knows me as the Furs Lady, and I know him as the Returning Man. He still pretends to be a commoner, and I don't call him out on his lie. I talk to him as little as possible. My sisters and comrades all know the dangers of falling in bed with an unknown. Developing an attachment is never Developing an attachment is never an option as part Prometre warriors. The less contact I have with the returning man, the better. 203 days have passed since the slaughter. People all over Mieri are beginning to lock themselves in their homes. They refuse to interact with others and very rarely leave to collect food. The nobles are now taking on more slaves as the economy fails and the market becomes dead. I considered closing my shop so I had more time to to spread the poison, but the thought of the returning man stopped me. It had barely been one complete moon since we first shared a bed, but the longer I am with him, the less my mind rings out with the screams of my kin. In the end, I tell myself I keep the shop open to maintain my cover. She's lying to herself. She's in denial. She keeps it open so she can see the returning man again. Hint, hint. Uh, you know. 224 days have passed since the slaughter. I have successfully poisoned the water supply to both the upper class and lower class parts of Myiri. The deaths must be in the thousands now. The returning man comes less and less these days. He is distracted and tired when he does visit. He no longer wishes to lay with me. Instead, he just wants to be in the same space as me. He showers me with gentle kisses and whispers of kindness. He promises that if we survive the plague, he will take care of me. I feel reluctant to kill him, even though he is Myrian. Regardless, I know I must kill him soon, before I can no longer find it in myself to do so. 236 days have passed since the slaughter. The cunning King Locust Mir has discovered that the plague is actually poison in the water. Damn that mongrel to the depths of Firath. I will kill him before the next moon. That beast will be slain, just like my brethren. I almost left to kill the king as soon as I heard the news. Luckily, the returning man came back and distracted me. I'm grateful he distracted me. Now I can carefully plan the king's demise. I've decided I can spare the returning man my wrath. After all, intentionally or not, the Myrians left one Prometra alive. I figure if I am to stay alive, so can one Myrian. Sorry, just checking something. 251 days have passed since the slaughter. Most of the Myrians are dead, only a few remain, and they are dying off without support from the others. Actual sickness has spread through the air from the poison victims. After killing the king and escaping with the returning man, I will enlist a few Shridian allies to ensure the deaths of the survivors. The returning man has requested to speak to me tonight, but I told him no. Tonight the king dies. Tomorrow we can talk. I suspect he only wishes to tell me of his true heritage anyway, as if I would care he is a noble rather than poor. I am a king. Ooh, so good. It's still 251 days. A whole day hasn't passed since the last paragraph. 251 days have passed since the slaughter. I approach the castle in the dead of night. I am carrying no shortage of weapons, a bow, a sword, and 2 daggers. There are no guards at the front gate. I suspect there are not enough people left to guard anywhere but the king's chambers. Locust will be in the deepest, most sequestered part of the castle, but his number of protectors will be dwindling. The most harrowing part of this assassination shall be the castle halls. The rest should be simple. As I trawl the winding corridors, a certain vindictive giddiness crawls up from my toes to my chest. Finally, finally, after so long, my people will be avenged. My brothers, my sisters, my comrades and friends, even the animals our kingdom was home to. Prometra was the land of promise, and after that was snuffed out, I swore an oath to eliminate the culprits. Tonight is the night. I began to gain speed, little by little, until my feet are soaring across the ground. I feel no fear of being caught. Come and get me, I think. I dare you. Soon I turn a corner, and at the end of the hall is an ornate wooden door decorated with gold inscriptions. 4 royal guards stand in front, but I don't even pause in my pursuit. Laughter echoes against the walls as I pull out my bow. I only have time to take out 2 before they are upon me. I discard my bow and pull out my sword. I can make another bow in the future, after I exterminate the king. The guards try their best, but they are weary, and I am a king trained in Shudao. When I stand alone in front of the obnoxious doors, I only pause for a brief moment. I'm covered in blood and breathing slightly heavier than normal. My hair is tousled and my cheeks are flushed a pleasant pink. My eyes glimmer with excitement, and I finally give the heavy doors an abrupt heave. They are lighter than I expect, must be fake gold, and they fling themselves open. I stumble in, ready to declare my vengeance and destroy Locust. However, the sight greeting my eyes stops me cold in my tracks. The room is empty except for the returning man. The returning man wearing a crown. My excitement fizzles and pops like candy the youth would buy. A man I have known for almost a year stands in front of me. A man who I have been hunting since the slaughter stands in front of me, and he dares look at me with confusion and betrayal in his eyes, like he's the victim here. What are you doing here, lovely? What's happened? He looks at my bloodied figure. Have you been injured? I can't find it in myself to look at him. I am frozen by my disgust and shamefully my grief. My head is pounding and my chest aches. My eyes burn threateningly and my throat feels swollen. Locust? I ask, and my face burns when my voice wobbles dangerously. I was going to tell you tonight, but you said you were busy. Okay, now that's as far as I've gotten. I actually haven't finished this one yet, and I want to finish it, but I just don't have the motivation for some reason. I'm actually really excited to be done with this one because I want to post it somewhere. I really hope that it gets some attention because I'm actually really proud of this one. So basically, I gotta explain what happens or what would be explained by Locust before the end of the story. So the Shredans, the people of the country of Shredao, are like ninja assassins. And their country is actually pretty small because they're just a secluded area of people chaining and ninja arts and stuff like that. They don't have a vast army or anything like that. What they want to do though is they wanted to use manipulation and techniques like that. So they convinced Locust by sending him messages and stuff that Myuria, or no, not Myure, that Prometra was planning an attack, an all-out war attack against Myure, and Locust, the king of Myure, knew that they would lose. He knew that Prometra was trained full of great warriors and people who were wonderful fighters and stuff like that, and so he knew that if they attacked, his entire country would be wiped out. So he launched a preemptive attack against Prometra. And since it was a surprise attack, which Prometra had no idea was coming at all, because they had no positive interactions between Myura and them, but they didn't have any negative interactions either. So they thought they were good. They thought they were on good, solid, neutral terms. But then suddenly, out of nowhere, they attacked, and the Prometras lost because they were just so surprised. And so then, the King of Myire, that is the main character, whose name I actually haven't even decided. Oh, wait, yeah, I have. It's Helikika. It's given right at the beginning. So, Hel, as I'll call her, comes and decides to get revenge. She's the king of her land. All of her people, her sisters, her people, her subjects, they've all just been slaughtered. So she decides to go and attack, and she's taken out almost all of them, and she still doesn't know that Shredao is the one who started it all. And Shredao used to be their ally. This whole time, she still thinks Shredao is their ally. And also, of course, otherwise they would have been sus about it in the beginning, Locust doesn't know that Prometra even had an alliance with Shredao. It's a secret alliance. So it's a whole thing that Shredao set up. And I was going to leave it as kind of like a cliffhanger at the end of this, that maybe they're planning on working together to try and take out Shredao, which would be their biggest challenge yet, since Shredao would see through most trickery they would try. I don't know. It was a whole exciting thing. I haven't finished writing that yet though. That's just canon as it is. This one's significantly less cool. Ugh, my throat. My throat's trying to lubricate itself by dripping mucus down it and stuff. So it's smoother when I read, because I don't usually talk this much. but it's really just gross. This one's meh, it's not okay. It's kind of like the Sherlock one I read earlier, except I think it takes place in modern time. Sloppy. They were all sloppy, every single one. Blood coated the wall and pooled on the floor to her left of the body against the kitchen wall. If you looked close enough, you could even see specks on the ceiling, and the murder weapon was still implanted in the victim. The kitchen knife block was tipped askew, with knives falling out onto the counter, some falling to the bloody floor. Next to the murdered woman was a pool of blood, but there was a larger puddle on her left than her right. There was bloody footprints from the puddle on her left to the door and back at the back of the kitchen. So, with these clues in mind, it's simple to deduce that it was a crime of passion, and the suspect regretted their actions immediately after. They probably got into a huge dispute over something important, and then the Vic said something particularly upsetting. In response, the suspect grabbed the knives from the block, knocking it over and sending the knives flying. The suspect, now armed, advanced on the victim until she was pressed against the wall and stabbed her in the chest, breaking several of her ribs and puncturing her lung, possibly nicking the Vic's heart. He then fell to his knees by her side as she sunk to the floor next her. As she sunk to the floor next to her until she died before panicking and leaving the scene, and probably to the other side of the country. He won't have gotten in too far though, because in his panic state he left without packing anything, so he doesn't have any cash, his passport, or his ID. Yeah, it's just like practice writing, I guess. A lot of the time I get like a story idea and I don't actually go anywhere with it. Like, okay, actually, the one that actually like got me in the mood to like start reading my stuff to you, I just wrote this like right before the stream, so like an hour and a half ago. Uh when faced with the wall in front of her, Asuka didn't know what to do. Even though the deep scarring over her eyes didn't allow her to see, she knows it's there. She could smash through it, but what if another wall awaits on the other side? She could try to jump it, but what if a roof blocks her way? She could try to dig under it, but what if the ground she stands on is impenetrable? Sighing to herself, she leans her head against the cool, dry wall. She can smell the paint on it and briefly tries to guess its color. Why were all of these tests so impossible? If she doesn't predict the perfect course of action, her little sister will be doused again. The thought makes her shudder. They need to find a way out of here. They need to escape. Sub A, complete the examination or punishment will be distributed. Frustration builds in Asuka, and with a sharp growl, she smashes her fist through the drywall, only to be met with cement. Wrong answer then. So frustrated she is with this outcome that she just decided to keep smashing. She pounds the cement into pieces and it decides. Story, past tense, present tense, they're basically the same thing. She just decides to keep smashing. She pounds the cement into pieces and steps through the hole she made into a room filled with scientists. She can hear them all hum to themselves in a supremely unimpressed manner. Just as she goes to rip their smug throats out, the snug collar around her throat squirts the holy water down her throat and chest. Fuck! Asuka curses as she falls to her knees, writhing in pain. The sound of her own sizzling skin rings in her ears, and the scent of burning, necrotized skin clogs up her airways. The stench is so thick she can taste it, which results in her gagging. Asuka raises her fingers up to her neck and starts to rip her own dead and burnt skin from her neck. Even without her nails, her soft fingers dig and peel away the layers of flesh. It's tender enough to slip right off her collarbone when she pulls. Just before she passes out from pain, she hears the apathetic voice of the director call, Test 178 complete. So this one, I just started writing, like, with the wall and stuff. I just, like, started typing and and waited to see where it took me. And, we ended up with a vampire and her vampire little sister who are in a testing facility being regularly tortured and experimented on. uh turn they did some experiment where they pulled out her eyes because she could see better and stuff like that. They ripped her nails off so she couldn't attack them, so she actually just has fleshy fingers with no fingernails. uh and then they have a collar around her neck which squirts out holy water, which, as you can see from the description, burns her skin off to the point where it's just like it's so cooked through that like it falls off, like ribs fall off the bone when they've been cooked enough. This is another one where I did the same thing as the top one. I just started going. I loved this character description at the beginning one. And I think I'm just gonna read the character description, and then I'm just gonna skip past the rest of it, because it's not that great. Air bubbles again. She had hair darker than any burnt corpse, skin as pale as freshly fallen snow on a sunny day, and red eyes that would cut right through you. When she looked at you with those scarlet eyes, it wasn't hard to understand the fact that she instantly understood your life story. It was an incredible life talent, and she didn't hesitate to use it. She also had sharpened teeth, but that couldn't really be considered surprising considering what you've just heard. I mean, you have all the signs. The red eyes couldn't be more obvious. She was very clearly a vampire. The rest of it's meh. Put a story here. Okay, then we have number 11. Number 11 is amazing. I love this story idea. In fact, I love it so much, I'm scared to read it on stream because what if somebody steals it? Not that I think anybody reads my stories enough to do that, but what if? So, we're going to read it anyway because, but it's called Under Construction, and chapter 1 is this story is fucked. Basically, the main well, you'll see. We'll just go through it and you'll see. See if I'm good enough at explaining things. Chapter 1, this story is fucked. Snoop Lub, newbie Kickley. Wait a second, is the universal translator not on? La Alexia insultated. Pause. I've got this. Readers, just give me a second. Where was it? Character development, setting, genre, storyline? No, not those. Oh, there it is. Universal translator. English. There we go. Rewind. It's the last things up here. Backwards. Play. Fuck this, I'm out, the alien shouted. All around him purple flames roared and green smoke sank towards the background, and warbled screams rang out in the distance. The alien wasn't concerned about these things, however. He was more concerned about the two flirtblixers following him as he stomped away from his house. Kerlicksnick, you're being ridiculous. The Quixoglians next door just made us a nice dinner, and you are going to sit down and eat it with us. The female flirtblixer, Kerlicksnick's mother, called after him. I'm not going to eat soccer rocks, Mom. She was my best friend. That's disgusting. Kerlicksnick's mother gasped at his language. And don't call me that. I told you I go by Licksnick now. Don't talk to your mother that way. I've already told you a million times that kind of judgmental language isn't welcome in our home. Kerlicksnick's father yelled in his wobbly tone. Licksnick just groaned as his mother began to speak again, in a more gentle but still wavering voice. I know we haven't practiced cannibalism before, but most people do these days. I'm sure you're just imagining it tastes worse than it does. But several work colleagues of mine are cannibals, and they say it tastes just like soup beebles. You love soup beebles. Come inside and eat, sweetie, please. Honestly, I don't know why you try with him anymore, Luxie Marley. He's been such a hassle lately. He acted the same way the first time he went to Torture Song. Okay, so what this is supposed to be is it's supposed to be like they live on a planet where like morals aren't a thing. But I got rid of one part because I thought it was a bit too far. Even if these aliens don't have any morals, us humans do. And it might be a little offensive. All of these books are completely unedited, so they're not like set up to be like kind to the reader. They're set up just the way that they're written, so they're not, made for comfort. There we go. There we go. He's acted the same way the first time he went to Torture Con. It's ridiculous. He's acting like those stupid Earthlings we got him from. There was a pregnant pause. Oh shit. Mom, what does he mean by that? Nick asked hesitantly. Instead of answering him, his mother rounded furiously onto his father. Oh, look what you've done now, Dirklishness. You said we could raise him as his own, and you wouldn't bring it up again. He's made so much progress. He's just as much Fleur Blister as either of us. Bullshit, Lux. Just look at him. Lixnick's father turned to him. You only have 6 limbs and 3 eyes. How could you have thought you were normal? Your mother and I were shocked you managed to grow blue skin at all. We were even more shocked when your tongue managed to split, but that's about it. What did you think when you went to school and all your classmates had 6 arms and 8 limbs? Did you think everyone else was weird? Fuck, you're an alien, son. Your mother and I have always raised you as one of our own, but you never respect us, even with all we've given you, taking you away from that primitive planet. You should be begging to listen to us. Lixnick could not deal with this. He couldn't think. He couldn't breathe. Life didn't make sense anymore. Sure, he knew he was different, but he thought he just had some kind of genetic disability or something. He didn't think he was adopted, much less a fucking alien. Because instead of responding to that, he just turned and ran away. His entire life was a lie. He wasn't even a Flirtblitzer. What the hell does he do now? He's seen a movie where adopted characters go after their parents, usually to murder them, but it's not like Lixnick could do that. His birth parents were on a different planet. Who was he? What was he? Aren't you just Mr. Whiny? Well, if you really want to know, you're some kind of human Flirtblitzer hybrid. You were born human, but somehow the atmosphere on Flirtblitzon mutated your DNA into a half-human, half-Flirtblitzer. He was some kind of mistake. Oh yeah, you can't hear me. A disgusting mutant that shouldn't exist. Maybe he should just kill himself. That would probably fix all of this. Wait, what? That won't fix anything. Hey, asshole, man up and face your issues like a real protagonist. It was pretty easy to kill yourself on Flirtblitzon, his planet. Murder was completely acceptable. Pretty much all you had to do was insult someone holding a weapon. Spotting a house with gunshots ringing inside, he broke down the door and wandered right in. No, stop this! Without the protagonist, there is no story. With no story, neither of us has a purpose for existing, you idiot! You're going to get us both killed, dipshit! There was a man standing over a dead woman. Hey, Clockstick! Lixnick shouted at the man. What did you just call me? The man screamed at Lixnick, waving his gun towards him. I said, you're a clockstick. The man aimed at his gun and pulled the pause. Okay, how do I fix this? When did this story even begin going down the shitter? I guess when the protagonist had no idea what to do, felt misplaced. I mean, I guess I could send him to Earth, but that would require me to... No. I mean, it would work, but it's illegal. Everyone says it just fucks stories up beyond repair. Authors aren't allowed to just hop right into the story. There has to be another way to fix this. Well, this story is already broken beyond repair. How much could it hurt to try and fix it up a little? Okay, so first I guess I should go back a bit. Rewind. Stop. There. Perfect. Now it should be right around there. Disable the fourth wall. Great. Now I can interact with Lixnick. Play. He was some kind of mistake. A disgusting mutant that... Okay, stop right there, buddy. What the hell? Who the hell was that? Hey, I'm the author, but you can call me Random. The author? The hell is that? What's going on? Was he going crazy? No, you aren't going crazy, and all of those other questions aren't very important. I'm here to take you to Earth. That way your life has purpose, my life has purpose, and the readers are entertained. Everyone's happy. The strange voice echoed all around him. He tried to take in all the things it said, but everything going on was way too overwhelming. He had decided to focus on the Earth part. Earth? Is that my home planet? You can send me there? Now you're catching on. Yeah, there would be no problem for me. Do you want me to? This was a lot to consider. Did he want to say goodbye to his parents? Not really. He was infuriated with them at the moment. They hadn't told him he was an alien. All those nights he spent wondering why he was different, curious if he would die before his classmates because he was disabled. All of these questions had answers, and his parents had refused to tell him. He could make a home on Earth. He could find people like him. Yes. Great. Now I just have to... Yep, wow, this is easier than usually is. It's almost like, wait a second. Well, shit, we have a problem. Problem? What kind of problem? It seems I might have thrown out a few important things earlier while trying to turn the universal translator on. Well, what did you share? What did you throw out? I'm sure we'll be fine without them. I threw out Sorry, I took a drink of water. I threw out character development, setting, genre, and the fucking storyline, Lixnick. We need to find them on Earth before the editor finds out. Fuck! My right to revise has been revoked. I can still work around this, but it's our job to get a lot. But our job just got a lot fucking harder. I'll help you get to Earth and figure your shit out, but you need to help me figure out where your character development will be, where the setting will take place, or what your character development will be, where the setting will take place, what genre this is, and what storyline this will follow. Deal? Deal. Chapter 2. Lixnick is an indecisive crybaby. Why is everything so blurry? Licksnake asked, looking around the new and strange terrain he was in. The sky was light blue, and fluffy white masses floated by, far out of his reach. Tall, yellowish something sprouted from the ground all around him. In the distance, he could see a few buildings. They looked nothing like buildings on Fort Blixon, but he couldn't think of anything else they could be. Everything he saw seemed to be buzzing almost, vibrating in place. Or maybe it was bending? Or was it stretching in place? It was really hard to tell, and it was beginning to give him a headache. Well, one of two things is happening. Either everything is Earth and everything isn't Earth at the same time, because there's no setting, so technically everywhere is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. That sounds really, really complicated. Or you're allergic to the atmosphere on Earth, and since you're suffocating, not enough oxygen is getting to your brain, causing you to hallucinate. Wait, what? How the hell do we know which one it is? Am I just going to die when I finally start to figure out what I am? Relax. Even if you are suffocating, your plot armor will activate and something will appear to save you in less than 4 minutes. That's roughly how long it would take for you to die. Why? How does that work? Why? How does that work? The clear exhaustion echoed through Lichtnick's voice as he ranted desperately at nothing. Oh, real mature editor. So grown up of you to pretend I don't exist. Really, you must be at the top of your game. What? What the hell are you? What the fuck are you talking about? Just tell me how you know I'm not gonna die! He shouted, clearly annoyed at the idiotic voice in his head, bossing him around like some kind of lame, stupid not god. Oh, so now you've moved on to name calling. Wow, I'm so impressed. You wouldn't even exist without me. Like, I know I fucked up. You literally exist to help clean up my fuck ups. You're a glorified fucking Roomba. What the absolute hell are you talking about? Seriously, what is going on? What the hell is a Roomba? I'm scared and confused and alone, and you're all I have, and I seriously can't deal with the fact that I might be dying right now. I just found out I am literally an alien fucking hybrid, and that's not even. He doesn't know he's a hybrid yet. Doesn't know he's a hybrid yet. He doesn't know he's a hybrid. I'm so literally a fucking alien. That's not even mentioning that my parents, or who I thought were my parents, are probably eating my childhood best friend right now. I've known Sakura all my life, and she's being fucking devoured by the people who raised me. My entire fucking universe feels like it was just followed by a big motherfucking black hole. So for the love of fuck, please just tell me what the absolute fuck is going on. That's a lot of F words. Like, way too many. The hybrid was now full on sobbing hysterically like a wimpy ass little bitch. Haha, good one, editor. I'm sorry about all that shit I was saying. You're important too. God knows how many mistakes I've made, and without you, this story would be more of an obscene pile of garbage than it already is. Who is the editor? And why do you keep ignoring me? Is everything I just say useless garbage to you? Is my life just that fucking boring? Lixnick was confused and helpless. And hopeless. Whoever this editor person is, they're probably still very pissed at Random for royally screwing the story, and they can also probably see straight through Random's blatantly obvious ploy to use their right to revise to get their right to revise reinstated. It won't be reinstated. Ugh, fine. I guess that route isn't going to work. Hey, Licksnick, now that it's been roughly 6 minutes and I'm sure you aren't suffocating, I need you to try something else for me. Speaking out loud gives the editor way too much room to talk because of overly descriptive dialogue tags, not to mention if anybody else hears you talking out loud to me, they'll think you're insane. Lickstick was curled up in a ball, sobbing erratically and rambling desperately under his breath. His four blue arms curled protectively around himself, as if that could shield him from the unnatural world he had found himself in. His forked tongue curled around the names of everyone he had ever known, trying to decide whether any of them were real, trying to decide if his reality itself was real. His three eyes released tear after tear. Okay, we get it. He doesn't look human. We'll fix that in a minute. Right now, I need to make sure he's okay. Lick Snake, buddy, can you hear me? Curlick Snake, listen! Curlick Snake's mumbling stopped cold and he looked slightly upwards. That's it. I need you to take a few deep breaths and completely clear your head. Can you do this for me? He took a deep breath and held it in for a few seconds before releasing it slowly. When he was finally calm enough to think clearly, he refocused on what the voice in his head was saying. Are you feeling better now? He released another breath before answering. Yeah, I think I'm feeling better now. Good. Now we need to fix that issue of you responding out loud at me. Not only does it give the editor a valid excuse to butt in with their bullshit opinions, but it will also make you look like a nut job to the humans around you. So I want you to try and think something directly at me, and then we'll work on your appearance. What's wrong with my appearance? I thought I looked like a human, and that's why I don't fit in on my planet. Licksnick thought to himself, effectively fixing the issue of looking crazy, but doing effectively nothing to stop me, cough, the editor, from commentating on this steaming pile of garbage story. Oh, shut up, art editor. No one gives a shit about your opinion. And oops, I forgot you didn't hear me earlier, Licksnick. Well, basically, you looked like a human when you were born, but the atmosphere on Flurplixon morphed you into some kind of weird, nasty human Flurplixer hybrid. Long story short, you don't fit in on your planet, but you certainly wouldn't fit in on Earth either. So I'm a freak here too? I'm just some nasty mutant who doesn't fit in anywhere? An abomination spawned from some intergalactic kidnapping? Licksnick's thoughts felt colder, and his chest began to ache with a loneliness that had been hanging off the edges of his consciousness for years. It had never felt so potent as it did right in that moment, when he realized he would never meet another being like himself. Yep, now you understand. Don't worry too much, though. I can make you look just like a human, even if on the inside you'll still be a mesh of confusing mutated genes. What kind of human should you look like, though? I've got it. Character description. Licksnake is an 18-year-old Indian American human male with smooth brown skin and brown eyes to match. He has curled dark hair with black rimmed glasses that rest on his nose. He has a short, slim stature and long, lanky limbs. He is wearing a plain white shirt and in a plain pair of blue jeans. Licksnick watched in awe and horror as his body began to morph and change. His second set of arms began retracting into his abdomen. His semi-scale blue skin began to soften and lighten into a brown, hairy texture. His vision became even more blurry, and suddenly his balance was completely thrown. Even in his sitting position, he felt like he would tumble over at any minute. Some strange contraption began to materialize in front of his face, and his mouth began to feel crooked and empty. Terror didn't even begin to summarize what Licksnick was feeling. Everything was wrong, wrong, wrong. When he looked down, he saw something that wasn't himself. He had never considered how disturbing it would be to look down and see a body not his own. His nerves screamed in protest, and his thoughts yelled and screamed over each other, trying to get a handle on what the absolute fuck was happening. You're fine, just calm down. Ugh, everything has to be a whole ordeal with you, doesn't it? You wanted to fit in on Earth, right? Well, now you do. And I even found a way to make the setting more bearable. The glasses you're wearing are an absolute... I should say the lack of setting. The lack of setting more bearable. The glasses you're wearing were an absolute genius idea of mine. They counteract the effects of being on not Earth. I can't believe me and the editor managed to write such a crybaby. Seriously, how the hell are you supposed to survive long enough to do whatever the hell you wanted to do on this planet? Speaking of which, what do you want to do now that you're here? Random's rant was long enough for Licksnick to take a few breaths and calm down. When faced with the question of what to do now that he was actually here, well, he didn't actually know. Why had he agreed to come to Earth? To spite his not actually parents? Find a place where he belonged? To save a dying story? If he was getting revenge on his parents, then maybe he'd already succeeded. If he was looking for a place to belong, apparently Earth wasn't the place to go. He was just an alien. He was just as alien here as he was on Flirplixon. To save the story? Who the hell was Random kidding? This story was way past the point of repair and restore. He guessed at this point he just wanted to live a normal life. I want you to fix my body and take me home so I can live a boring, normal, everyday life. Yeah, you see, the problem with that is you're a protagonist. You don't get to live a boring life. I would never let that happen. You're stuck here now. You were the dumbass that wanted to go to Earth. Now you're here and you're staying. But I'm not a total monster. I'll set you up a nice, normal life on Earth in between chapters, and when something interesting happens, we'll pull the readers back in. They don't need to deal with your boring, whining normalness. Chapter 3. It hasn't been titled yet. Readers, what are you doing back here? Life has been just as boring today as any. Hey, loser, are you gonna make my coffee or what? I don't have all day. School starts in like 10 minutes, and I only want to miss first period. The girl in front of him was wearing a tight red shirt that didn't cover her stomach and emphasized her figure, along with jeans that were torn to shreds. When she had first walked in, Licksnick had wondered if she'd gotten them stuck in one of those paper shreddy thingies. The light seeping through the coffee window made her pale skin and shiny golden hair glow slightly. I thought we agreed you wouldn't talk during my shift. It's distracting. Right, I'm sorry. Could you please repeat your order? Licksnick threw on his nicest smile. It had taken a lot of practice to learn how to move his face muscles the right way. Humans bare their teeth at each other to convey kindness. They call it a smile. You weren't even listening? Ugh, I will not take this kind of treatment from a socially awkward dork with ugly hair and stupid glasses. The girl flipped her straightened blonde hair over her shoulder. Her face was crinkled up in a wrinkled sneer. You know what? Don't even bother. She whipped around, and her long ponytail nearly whipped Lixnick from across the counter. If his boss found out how many customers he'd lost, Lixnick would be fired on the spot. Look at what you've done! What was so damn important that you had to interrupt my shift? The readers are back. That means something important is about to happen. Considering you just caused a third customer to storm out this week, I bet you're going to be fired. Lixnick glanced warily at the people around him. Several were taking not so discreet glances. He didn't currently see his manager in the room, but she very well could be. I can't get fired. Do you remember how difficult it was for you to set this job up for me? I can hardly afford rent right now. What am I supposed to do if I get fired? Of course I remember how hard it is. Do you know how difficult it is to set things like this up when you can't go back and revise later? It's so difficult. Not to mention you screw up at every turn, and it's not like I can rewind or pause time anymore. If you were just less of an insufferable child who would kill himself over his stupid parents, we wouldn't be in this stupid situation. Excuse me? Oh, right, it's my fault we're in this mess. That's exactly how it went. Of course, I'm the one who lost the fucking storyline. Of course, it's my fault this story is a piece of crap. Excuse me? It is your fault. You're the protagonist. You're supposed to be what gives this story life. You're supposed to be what makes this story relatable and interesting. Your entire existence is supposed to be a window for the readers to look through. People read stories to step into a life not their own. If someone picks up this book, it's because they want to step into your life. But no, Mr. Whiny McBoring has to make sure his life is the least interesting thing to ever grace the pages of a book. Sir, oh wow, like it's such a crime to want to live my life. You're such a hypocritical bitch. Everything you do is so you can keep the story going just a little bit longer. But have you ever considered that I just don't give a shit about Mr. Lick's neck? The brutally butchered name caught Lixnick's attention. Standing in front of him was one of the strangest humans he'd ever seen. Not that most humans weren't strange, but this one really caught his eye. Oh God, no. Please don't tell me. I will kill someone off if this is what I think it is. I refuse to believe that this is the story's genre. Lixnick decided he would deal with Random later. She had freakouts like this often. The girl in front of him was unique in a way he hadn't seen before. She had straight black hair that fell obnoxiously long and had purple streaks. Black kitty ears adorned her head, and she was wearing something between a Gothic-style dress and a maid's uniform. She had purple and black stockings all the way up her pale legs, and was wearing shiny black boots with a small heel. Lixnick wanted to silently stare. He really did. But he'd learned the first few days on Earth that staring was considered very rude. So he put on his smile again and apologized. Oh wow, how unlike other girls. Can you hear the sarcasm? I hope you hear the sarcasm. I am so sorry, miss. What can I get you today? He pushed the glasses up a bit further. They had fallen off before, or he'd wake up having knocked them off in his sleep. It was never a pleasant experience. Everything would get wobbly and unsteady, not to mention the stretching and twisting and color changing. That Earth was a dizzying sight. He preferred to keep his glasses on. I'm sorry for yelling. You were just looking angrily into the distance, dead to the world. She chuckled slightly, and her voice came out confident, but still wobbled a little. It made him slightly homesick. I'm going to puke. I am seriously going to puke. I will not allow this to be a romance. I will boycott this story. Yeah, I was distracted by an annoying thought, Lixnick replied, dickwad. I'd like a large vanilla latte, please. She smiled, without baring her teeth. Lixnick typed her order in the register and began pouring it for her. It was pretty simple. During his first week of working, he had been taught how to make all of the drinks, and it was a pretty easy process. He handed her her drink. She pulled out her pink striped wallet, yes, and paid for her drink. He said his usual farewell, and the customers leave on good terms. Thank you for coming to the Roasted Cafe. Have a nice day. Her wallet has the lesbian flag on it. Yes. Phew. I didn't think I would live with myself if this had turned out to be a coffee shop romance. I guess I get to live another day with my dignity. The strange human left, and Lixnick wondered if he would see her again. He finished his shift not long after that. It was still pretty bright outside, and Lixnick wondered if there was anything interesting he could do before he got home. There better be something interesting. You know the readers are back, and if you fail to entertain them, it's my ass on the line. You know what happens to authors who don't succeed in pleasing the readers? I don't know, they realized they suck at writing. Lixnick thought as he began wiping down his empty tables. That's exactly what happens. And you know what happens after that? What? They lose their motivation to write, and when they lose their motivation to write, stories go unfinished. What do you think would happen to you if I stopped writing this story? I guess I'd get to go back to my life. No, you'd cease to exist. Your entire life is in these pages, and the second I decide not to write anymore, you pause and never move a second forward in time. What? You're saying that I'm in a completely fucked up story with no plot whatsoever, and the minute you decide to quit, that's it for me? Yeah, and if I decided to delete the story, then you never existed in the first place. That means you were never born, never taken from Earth, never met your parents, and never met the girl they ate. Soccer Rocks. Her name was Soccer Rocks, and she was my best friend. And why is this happening to me? Here we go again. Nope, I refuse to deal with whiny Lipstick. Moving on. How about you find that human you were talking to earlier? The one in the cosplay. Big stretches. I'm tired. 1 a.m. But I kind of want to read the next one because the next one's also a good one. Uh, oh, also I stopped writing, so Lixnick's just kind of paused in time if you think of it in a real meta way. Number 12. Potential if you don't fuck it up. The first thing you know, uh, the first thing you need to know about fighting is that it's not actually fighting. It's dancing. He looked down to her, deep into her dark chocolate eyes. You need to learn how to hear the music your opponent is dancing to. You need to learn how to change the music into something completely different. You need to learn how to dance with the beat and how to dance against it. You need to learn how to see their favorite dance moves, the one they do more than the others. Finally, and the most important, you need to learn how to enjoy yourself the entire time. I know that last one sounds easy. The man knelt down in front of her and placed his calloused hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently. But that will be the hardest part of all. Now, do you think you can do it, sweetie? Ugh. It's a hard it's hard to keep a straight face with all the excitement bouncing around in her little 6-year-old body. But somehow Layla managed. Yes, Daddy. His face split into a proud smile. That's my little girl. First things first. Step onto Daddy's feet so he can show you how to dance, little lady. Gosh, my nose. It's so stuffed. I can't breathe. It's so bad. Ugh. Time skip. How many are there? Her voice was calm and steady as it flowed through the calm. A slightly more nervous voice came through the other end. 6? No, no, no. 8. Yes, 8 of them. Layla smirked to herself from the hiding place on the roof of the manor. The playful roll of her eyes, Layla spoke again. Total people in the building, Cam. I will need to keep track of the number of bad guys. Don't worry, I'll be in and out before you can say badass. Her voice was a smooth rumble. It contrasted slightly with her rapidly beating heart. She could feel a familiar kind of excitement begin to well up deep inside her. She could hear a faint beat begin, the sound of drums somewhere in the depth of her thoughts. Cameron sighed, exasperated. Just try not to leave such a big mess. We don't want this to go down like last time. Please, just get Connor to safety and collect the payment. There are a total of 143 guests in attendance, not including you, of course. Please be careful in there, and don't fuck this up. Layla couldn't Layla couldn't stop the smile growing on her face. When am I not careful? She turned her calm off before he could protest. She slipped through the open bathroom window below her, and her long, backless black dress flowed gracefully down her long, smooth, tan legs. Her hair fell in chocolate ringlets down her back, curled to perfection. She looked stunning. Stepping from the bathroom, she made her way through the hallway towards the ballroom, where the gathering was taking place. She picked a wall to stand by and searched the room for her targets. When a waiter walked by, she grabbed the drink but didn't drink from it. She didn't need any alcohol in her system. She was high enough from the excitement of what she was about to do. The case file given to her by Leo, her boss, had said Marcus Connor was this big business owner, and his brother had put a price on his head, so he could inherit the company. Big move, right? Her instructions were to lure the 8 hitmen trying to kill Connor from the room, quietly knock them out, or, if absolutely necessary, quietly kill them. Where's the fun in that? Layla never understood hitmen. 500,000 goes to the killer of Marcus Connor. But Layla was earning 800,000 just to keep him alive for one night. It certainly seemed to her like she was getting the better end of the deal. It wasn't her intention to follow the plan. It usually wasn't. There was just a kind of sharp rage she held for hitmen like these. She didn't want a single one of those bugs to make it out alive. With a smirk to rival the devil's, Layla walked towards the table in the front of the room. She pulled out a chair and used it to step up onto the table. She made sure to grab a fork on the way. Standing on the table, she lightly tapped the fork against her champagne flute to draw the room's attention. Smiling like a bad woman now, she cheerily announced, I just want everyone in this room to know I plan on killing Marcus Connor tonight. She finished off the wine in her glass with one swing to punctuate the statement. She was loud and confident. Her dad would have been proud. It was a lie, of course. Her objective was the opposite. But if there's one thing she knew bounty hunters hated, it was the thought of someone else killing their target. After all, they wouldn't get any of that sweet, sweet cash if they didn't do the killing. After that, everything paused, including the music that had been pounding inside her head. Chaos erupted. Hundreds of people ran towards the exits, most heading towards the large door behind her. Only a few didn't move. She could see the easy targets clear as day now. Six Six had guns, and the last two had knives. The only two people who were smart enough to keep their sights on Connor, while the rest of them all turned their attention to her. Suddenly, the music in her head started back up. Finally, she thought briefly, before smashing her fork against her glass. The entire the entire top part shattered, leaving just the stem. She held the stem in one hand and the fork in the other. She wanted to kill the two still going after Connor first. The problem was if she killed these two, Mr. Tall and Tattooed would kill her. She took a quick step backward and hooked the heel of her shoe behind the knife on the table. With that, she fired. She threw the stem at the guy hunting Connor, the fork at the woman hunting Connor, and finally kicked her foot up like a cheerleader, kicking the knife directly at Mr. Tattoo Cool for School. 3 for 3. Stem to the chest, fork through the eye, and knife in the throat. She didn't have time to celebrate, however, because the bullets were about to start raining down on her. She dropped to her stomach on the table, grabbing as much silverware as she could, before rolling off the other side of the table onto the floor. Once she was on the other side of the table, Layla checked to see how many knives she had. 4. Almost perfect. She would make it work. Still grinning, she peeked over the table and held 3 knives in one hand. She waited for a second and then threw the knives just as the base dropped within her head. Only 2 hit their targets. Frustrated, Layla reached behind her and pulled off one of her high-heel shoes. Take this, asshole, she called before launching it at him. The sharp heel nicked his neck, opening up an artery. Buzzed on adrenaline, she tossed the extra knife behind her and left her hiding spot. She almost didn't notice she had gotten each one before they had had the chance to fire a single bullet. All of the people carrying guns were taken care of. Hey, Mimi. Welcome back for stopping by. All of the people carrying guns were taken care of. Pulling 2 real knives from the sheath on her hip under her dress, she turns to the last 2 bounty hunters. Mentally dubbing them Blondie and Beardy, she whispered, Let's tango, boys. Oh, I know you never left, but I figured you probably, muted and went to somewhere else to play Wizard 101 for a bit, and then came back to chat and show you were still here. Let's tango, boys. She approached them, hips swinging to the beat in her head. She couldn't hear the beat they danced to. She could hear the beat they danced to. It was a slow and steady pulse, the beat of a trained agent. She didn't take the time to wonder where they might have learned. As one of the guys, Beardy, threw a punch, she twirled out of the way until she was behind him, before kicking him in the head. He stumbled forwards, and Layla ducked when Blondie attacked from behind. She dropped to the ground before kicking his legs out from underneath him. Beardy landed a kick to her stomach, which would definitely leave a bruise. Grabbing a plate from nearby table, Layla broke it over Beardy's head. Blondie was still recovering on the ground, so she resolutely stomped on his head. Crunch. 1 down, 1 more to go. Beardy threw a sharp jab, but Layla dodged. She ruthlessly kicked him where it hurt. He fell to his knees in pain before Beardy could recover. Layla pushed all of her strength into one uppercut. His head snapped back, and Beardy went to sleep. She calmly walked over to one of the fallen hitman, taking a gun. She was swift and calm when she shot Beardy in the head. The music abruptly cut out. Dropping the gun, she turned back to where she came. She chuckled to herself when she thought about the media storm this would bring. All of those people who ran like a herd of buffalo would squeal to the media like pigs. Layla loved riling up her superiors. She was enough of an asset to the company where she got away with bending the rules often. Now she just needed to locate Connor and collect the payment. Then she and Cameron would order pizza, as was tradition after a successful mission, and as was tradition after a successful mission. She was almost to the door when she saw the red. Usually, Layla had a very strong stomach. She had been trained to kill from a very young age. Blood, guts, and gore were her life. This was different somehow. Every single time Layla had killed someone, she had been able to go home and tell herself she wasn't a bad person. She could look in the mirror every night and say, "You did what you had to do. You protected somebody today." Never in her long life of murder had Layla Neben seen innocent blood on her hands. There, lying in front of her, was Marcus Connor, with a knife in his throat. She wanted to say she didn't know how it had gotten there. She wanted to say some other guest had thrown it, or there was an assassin unaccounted for. She knew where that knife had come from, however. She had carelessly thrown it away while caught up in the excitement. Her stomach roiled and her eyes watered. Her mouth, her mouth. Hold on, let me just. Oops. Her mouth felt dry and wet at the same time. Bile rose up in her throat, and she fought valiantly to keep it down. "Can't leave my DNA." The thought was brief and fleeting. All of her thoughts felt brief and fleeting. The blood crawled towards her feet. There was so much. She had seen blood before. She had seen dead bodies almost identical to this one. But they were bad guys. Her daddy always taught her, bad guys deserve it. She needed her best friend right now. She needed Cameron. She reconnected her calm. "Cameron, fuck, we have a problem. I'm so sorry. It was an accident. I swear, shit. I just." Layla's usually calm voice was warbled and broken. "Slow down, Layla. Tell me what happened." "Cam, I'm in deep shit." Line break. She could always tell it was a bad uh She could always tell it was a bad week when she could hear footsteps in the attic. Her dad was a caring man. He used to be a happy man, too. But even if he wasn't happy, he was kind. It was only when the liquor cabinet was unlocked that these things changed. Her dad went back to being a soldier when he drank. He was icy and indifferent to her. It wasn't bad now that she was old enough to take care of herself. During the bad weeks when she was little, she needed to stay at her friend's. It was hard and it hurt her deeply. When he was drunk, it was like her father didn't love her. He didn't feed her, bathe her, or tuck her in. Didn't even teach her to dance during the bad weeks. He would disappear into the attic and just stay up there. Once she had gone up to ask him to come down. "You are never allowed up here, Layla." That was the last time she ever went up into the attic. That was one of the only times in her entire life her dad had called her Layla. He was always little lady or little miss. He was never physically violent, but there were some nights during the bad weeks where she would wish he was, just so she could see him again. She didn't tell anyone about the bad weeks, but when she showed up to school looking scruffy and starved, Cameron didn't miss it. He didn't really have a choice in the matter when he dragged her to his house. Cam's mom was very considerate and didn't even ask questions when Layla asked to stay for a few days. It became a habit after the first time. Layla would come to school looking slightly worse for wear, and Cam would take her back to his house. Soon she was able to predict when the bad weeks were coming. Christmas, Layla's birthday, Valentine's Day, etc. She would hear the steps in the attic and leave through the window. He and Cameron became infinitely closer during these times. They were like siblings to each other. He took care of her. When she was feeling abandoned and neglected, he would be there to comfort her. When she told him she liked girls, he just hugged her tight. When she had nightmares about footsteps above her and ice brown eyes, he would hold her. They would sit in his bedroom on the carpeted floor late into the night. Most often, they would listen to horror stories or conspiracy stories about the deep, dark web. Often filled to the brim with curiosity, they would pinky swear to each other that one day they would explore the hidden, dangerous world out there together. I actually have a whole plan for this story, and it's not finished, and I might never finish it, but I'll show you guys the plan and explain it after I finish reading this. They were in Cameron's black car outside of an inconspicuous office building. Their employer, Robin Hood Incorporated, was a secret for obvious reasons. The main headquarters was small and only used for higher-ups and important meetings. The company's official mission was to protect those who deserved protecting, to take out threats to those people. RH Inc. was run mostly on the dark web. Layla received her missions in encrypted coded emails, which Cameron would decipher for them. He would write out the plans, gather all the information, map out the location, and basically do all the work. Finally, he would instruct Layla how to act from a safe at home. If Layla listened to him, usually everything would go smoothly. She rarely did follow the plan, though. She went off in her own and explosive ways, and Cam would clean up after her. She didn't think he would be able to save her ass this time. At least she was going to be fired from her dream job, but only God knows what would happen at the worst. RH was run by good people, but they were very strong in their beliefs to protect the innocent. I can see you biting your lip, Layla. Don't worry, everything is going to be okay. Just wait in here while I go talk to Michael. We're friends, and he'll understand. His voice always is warm and comforting. I don't know what I would do without him. I released my lip, and my my charging cord for my computer, all tangled up. Just untangling it real quick. We're friends. He'll understand. His voice always is warm and comforting. I don't know what I would do without him. I release my lip and pull him in for a hug. Why? Wait a second. Why do I switch from third person to first person? That's so terrible. I mean, switching tenses, that's one thing, but switching from no. Let me fix this real quick. That's so gross. She, yeah, her lip and pulled him in for a hug. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I know I fucked up big time. The image of Connor was burned into her brain, and the guilt was drowning her. She couldn't face Leo or Michael like this. She hadn't even needed to ask. He had already decided he would explain her horrible failure. When he got out of the car, she immediately sucked her lip back between her teeth and continued to worry it. She had killed an innocent man. There was absolutely nothing to separate her from those she killed every day. She was a monster, a murderer. These thoughts tumbled and twirled through her mind as she watched Cameron disappear into the Cameron was sweating buckets by the time the secretary directed him to Michael Carter's office. This was a bad idea. This was the worst idea. Why was he doing this again? Oh yeah, because the woman he loved had screwed herself over so royally she'd be lucky to wake up tomorrow at all if he didn't go through with it. Cameron didn't trust Robin Hood Inc. as far as he could throw it. Their devotion to the mission was cultish, not to mention how creepy it was to begin with. Protect those who deserve it? Who didn't deserve to be protected? Not to mention how hypocritical it was to kill people because they tried to kill other people. He didn't think for a moment this company was the good-willed, kind-hearted business Layla seemed to think it was. He hadn't even wanted to sign up for the job, but Layla had told him she was going to, no matter what, and he couldn't let her do it alone. Her dad had clearly fucked her up with his dance lesson. But when she wasn't killing people or talking about it, she was an angel. She was his rock throughout life. It wasn't like she was his rock throughout life. It's not like he had it bad, not as bad as her anyway. He had a loving mother, a roof over his head, and 3 meals a day. But every kid gets sad sometimes. She was there for him through thick and thin with a joke or a hug. Cameron knew he was in love with Layla when he was 10, but he still hugged her tight when she told him she liked girls. The older she got, the stronger she became. Her dad had instilled some warped moral code into her, and RH had just cemented it. He wished she didn't absolutely love her job, but she did. Cameron would see the smile on her face after she had killed who knows how many people. He would smile back at her and shove some pizza into her mouth. It was hard to cry when you were eating pizza, so after every mission, when he helped take the lives of criminals, he stuffed his face with cheesy goodness. He loved to see her smile. It made the lives he helped take almost worth it. But a piece of him still died a little every life she took. As he stepped into Michael's office, his resolve tightened. He would take care of her now as he had always done when they were kids. Michael looked up and smiled when Cameron walked in. Usually they were expected to report a successful mission through email, but Layla strayed from the plan so often, Michael had begun to expect to see Cameron after a mission. Let me guess, this time she dressed up as a clown and danced around the room singing circus music before she took out the targets. You do know we're supposed to be as covert as possible on these assignments, right? Cameron tried to smile. He really did, but it wobbled precariously as if it were about to tumble off his face. Michael, it wasn't Layla this time. I messed up. I messed up, Michael. Michael's smile fell away and he straightened in his chair a little. I was distracted while transcribing the mission statement, and I messed it up. I mixed up the photo, and Layla accidentally received the statement with Marcus Connor's face marked target. Michael blanched. Michael blanched. The flush of humor and joy fled his cheeks with vigor. His eyes turned to stone, and his lips compressed into a thin line. She turns her comms off during assignments, so I didn't know what had happened until she told me she had eliminated all 9 targets instead of 8. I'm so sorry, sir. A sound resembling a sob might have escaped Michael, and Cameron thought he saw some moisture well up behind his eyes. It was only seconds before his expression tightened again. Looking completely impassive, Michael pulled open a drawer in his desk and pulled out a gun with a silencer attached. Holy shit, Michael, don't do this. It was an accident, I swear I didn't mean it. Please just put that gun away and we can talk about this. Cameron begged, tears now running down his cheeks in rivulets. Please, God, please let me get out of this alive. Please let me see Layla smile again. Please let me hug my mom one more time. I'll be a saint. I'll quit this terrible job. I'll make Layla quit. Please just let me. You killed Mark, you fucker. Bang. Layla's lip was chapped and bleeding when her phone rang in her pocket. She probably jumped 7 feet, even with her seatbelt still fastened. She fumbled with her jean pocket until she could get her phone out. She was shaking so badly she dropped it in the crack between the seat and the door. Layla was able to retrieve it with minimal digging, and she immediately picked up. Hello? She asked. Her voice was steady, even while her hand shook slightly. Blood and pale dead skin swirled in her mind's eyes. Guilt bubbled up in her throat, and it only got worse when she heard Leo's voice. I need you to come to headquarters, Layla. She had to hold in a long storm of cuss words hearing that. He knows. The big boss knows. Layla was so fired. What if Cam gets fired too? Layla didn't want to be the reason Cam lost his job. She knew he complained often, but she was sure he was just complaining for the sake of complaining. She knew he liked his job. The information hunch, the strategizing, it was all right up his alley. The urge to just blurt out what she did and beg for forgiveness was strong, but she held it in. I'm already here, sir, she said instead. Her voice was the same steady rumble it usually became before missions, minus the quiet hum of joy she usually exuded on an assignment. Please come up to my office. The command was obvious, and it hung in the air like poison gas. The pressure was suffocating her. Leo didn't sound angry. He sounded just as casual as every other time she had spoken to him, but she knew better. Leo was the founder of RH, the CEO. Nobody believed in the company's mission as strongly as he did. Reluctantly, she shut the car off and headed inside. When Michael told him Marcus was dead, Leo could hear he was understandably very upset. He had frantically rambled. Leo, he's dead. Marcus dead. Agent Cameron stuck that bitch Layla on him. He's dead. I killed him. I killed Cameron. He deserved it. He killed Mark. She needs to be held accountable for what she's done, Leo. She needs to pay for taking Mark from me. It had taken quite a while to calm him down, but Leo had eventually gotten him to the point where he could tell the story more clearly. He told Michael Layla would be punished. He had called Layla and instructed her to come to him. It was such a shame Layla needed to be fired. She was such an incredible fighter, and she honestly enjoyed her work. Layla was one of the very few people who understood the philosophy behind this country. Most people just like to brush RH off as hypocritical and never look closer. This was a mistake on their part. His company saved lives every day. The people who were killed were always the worst kind of people. Sick monsters that have the right to ruin lives just because of their job. Leo didn't care what happened to people like that. But if they had the chance to protect the people he would take it. People like his parents who didn't deserve to be murdered. He would protect them all. Layla was one of the few who agreed, at least loosely, with his ideals. She believed that people who had done no wrong should be protected. But she had messed up. It wouldn't be fair nor smart to let her continue to work for his company after a mistake like that. Grief was a heavy emotion. It sat in his chest and compressed his airways. His mind was sluggish as if he were drunk, but not in a good way. He thought he might be crying, but it was hard to tell. Michael had been in a relationship with Marcus for 5 years, going on 6. Michael had planned on marrying Mark one day. Sure, he wasn't the best person in the world, but he didn't deserve to be murdered. At least both of his killers would pay the price. He would be avenged. Wiping some tears from his face, he glanced out the window. When he caught a glimpse of brown hair, he focused in. That was Layla. She looked completely scratch-free. Rage tore through him like lava. He briefly considered running out there with his gun, but she was already driving away. She would pay. He would ensure it. He almost couldn't believe Leo would let her get away with this. He wouldn't let this stand. He opened up his computer and signed in. He knew how he would handle this. He had heard more than once of a criminal broker unopposed to favors. Apparently, they were the best in the business. They would gather information on a target and set up a perfect plan based on their acquired knowledge to complete the task they were paid for. Michael began to write out an email addressed to Cotton Candy to Cotton to at Cotton Candy Kitty at Cotton Candy Kitty 69. Listen, Titty Licker, I'm not a murderer. I am just a sweet, innocent little girl with a big brain and a sexy bod. If you want somebody to end up dead, you need to pay me my asking price and the money needed to hire the people best suited for my plan. It's all in the fine print. I know reading is very hard for your tiny brain to process, but try really hard for me, alright, Dumplin'? You have 7 minutes before I terminate our contract. When Zoe looked at the phone, she gasped, offended. That fugly chicken nugget hung up on me! I bet he has a real hard time keeping a girlfriend, or getting one for that matter. She looked around the empty apartment and sighed. She was suddenly very hungry. Standing from her bed, she began to walk to the kitchen. She shivered a little as the cool air of the apartment brushed up against her pale bare legs. She was wearing a pair of Hello Kitty boxers that showed off her sexalicious booty and an XXXL graphic t-shirt with an image of pizza on it. She made her way towards the kitchen She made her way towards the kitchen and used her hair tie from her wrist to put up her dyed pink hair into a messy bun. I wish people would read my profile when they hired me, Zoe complained to the dark apartment. She dug through the cupboards until she found ramen noodles. I feel like I should. There we go. As she made her way towards the kitchen, she used the hair tie from her wrist to put her dyed pink hair into a messy bun. I wish people would read my profile when they hired me, Zoe complained to the dark apartment. She dug through the cupboards until she found some ramen noodles. She was sure whoever lived there wouldn't miss it too badly. As she watched her ramen noodles spin in the microwave, she heard her computer ding. The noodles were forgotten, and Zoe rushed back to the room she had left her bag in. Diving onto the bed, she opened her bag and pulled out her laptop. Checking the notification, she smirked to herself. $3,000 had just miraculously appeared into her bank account. Thank you, Titty Licker. By the time the microwave beeped, Zoe had her things packed up and her sniper rifle across her shoulder. I suppose I should get those, she whispered to herself. Bad guy or food? Bad guy or food? Ugh, fine, bad guy. Abandoning her delicious snack, she climbed out the window and onto the fire escape. She climbed to the roof, as silent and deadly as Billy from middle school's farts. Looking down the street, she began to mumble to herself. Talking out loud helped her focus and sometimes made her feel less alone. Okay, so 1:27 a.m. was when Titty Licker hung up on me. Ramen noodles take approximately 3 minutes to cook, and I think it probably took me another three to get out here. So she should leave the jewelry store any minute now, and dear God, I need to get a watch. Hearing the alarm go off below her, she smirked to herself. Peeking through her scope, She checked the vent on the roof of the store. Sure enough, there she was, Penelope Smith, or as Zoe had dubbed her, Roof Chick. After thoroughly investigating the crimes Titty Licker had sent her, Zoe had been able to deduce that the thief used the roof as an escape. Based on what the thief stole, it was statistically more likely the thief was female. So the name Roof Chick came into existence. Lining up the shot, Zoe killed her. Headshot. Fuck yeah, she whispered out to herself. Digging through her bag, she pulled out her phone and took a high-definition picture to send to Titty Licker. While she's at it, she saves the pic on her own phone. Job done, Zoe climbs down the fire escape, beginning to make her way home and taking back alleys the whole way. Her outfit was hardly appropriate to wear in public. Ugh. I think this flashback scene and then a short scene which I didn't finish writing is. Then I'm gonna hop off because 2.5 hours of reading makes Alex's voice sore. Zoe was playing in the garden, her strawberry blonde hair falling into her face as she bent to pick up a pretty rock. She held it up to the sun and watched it sparkle between her thumb and pointer finger. It was still slightly wet from the storm that rolled in last night while she slept. It was captivating, and in her distraction, her fingers slipped. "Ow!" she cried, holding her finger up to see. A tiny drop of blood bubbled up from a small cut. Tears began to well up in her eyes. She had an owie, and she needed Mommy to put a Band-Aid on it. Flailing over her cut, she ran to the house, and the pitter-patter of her feet trailed after her. Once she stepped inside into the kitchen, she looked around for Mommy. Remembering Mommy was in the painting room, she hesitated. Only for a second. Zoe wasn't allowed in the painting room. Neither was Daddy. Daddy told Zoe the painting room was for Mommy only. It was a special private room and no one else was allowed. Her hesitation didn't last long. She needed Mommy to make her boo-boo better. She ran to the painting room and opened the door without pause. The first thing Zoe noticed was the red paint. Red on the walls, red on the floor, and red on the ceiling. Next, Zoe noticed Mommy. Mommy's hair was just like Zoe's, except it was tangled and messy, with chunks of red and brown paint in it. Mommy was slashing a brush violently over a canvas, back and forth, up and down, over and over, and getting faster and faster. Mommy's breathing was quick and shuddering, like she was pretending to be a puppy at the park. Zoe paused for a second time. Mommy hadn't noticed her yet. Zoe could still turn around and find a Band-Aid herself. She could still go to her room and pretend she was never there. She could wait until later and tell her Mommy at dinner about her owie, about her owie. Just as Zoe was about to turn away, her finger pulsed slightly. Just a little sting, but it was enough. "Mommy, I got an owie. I need a Band-Aid. You need to kiss it back." Zoe stopped when Mommy whipped around to face her. Suddenly, Zoe was scared. Mommy didn't even look angry, but there was something in her face, something in her eyes, and it made Zoe scared. Before Zoe could say sorry and run up to her room, Mommy was stomping over to her. Zoe took a few steps back. She wanted to run, but it was too late. Mommy was gripping her arm tightly, gripping her arm too tightly. Mommy began to drag her back towards the kitchen to throw her out the door to the backyard, but suddenly stopped. Mommy's eyes were trained intently on the knife block, and Zoe's fear was starting to gurgle and roll in her gut. Zoe's fear started to grow over her heart like ugly, stupid vines. She felt her face get cold and tingly. Spots began to pop up against her head, flickering away when she focused on them. "Mommy, let go, it hurts!" Zoe cried out. Mommy didn't let go. She tightened her grip on Zoe and without a word pulled her across the kitchen, pulled her towards the knives. Mommy snatched a knife from the block and wrestled Zoe to the ground. With the little girl pinned to the floor, Mommy pulled Zoe's purple dress up and over her head. Zoe's vision was filled with purple as she began to squirm and thrash. Mommy, stop it, I'm sorry." She was sobbing plaintively now, more terrified than she had ever been. Mommy looked down at the pale pink skin, dotted with freckles, and then at the knife in her hand. It had ridges used for digging into meat. She smiled to herself, and then brought it to her daughter's skin and slowly dragged it diagonally across the girl's upper back. Mommy frowned to herself. There was only a pink line with little flakes of dead skin following around the trail. Irritation began to well up in the woman. This wasn't like the movies. Where was the red? Angry, she dragged the knife across the skin in the opposite direction. When she got the same result, she began to slash violently at her pale canvas, back and forth, up and down, over and over, getting faster and faster. Soon the red came, and all at once she was painting again. Red splattered her face, it splattered the floor, it splattered the purple dress, all while the beautiful symphony of screams and wails came from the child beneath her. Her daughter's legs kicked frantically as mommy fanatically slashed the knife back and forth. Zoe's mind was filled with boiling, burning, searing, tearing pain. Her throat had claws ripping it open. Her back was being torn by a blender. Her knees and feet were being slammed by a hammer. Her wrists were being clamped in a vice. Zoe's last thoughts before oblivion swallowed her was how her little finger didn't hurt at all. Layla's life was falling apart. The sky was falling and the world was crumbling beneath her feet. First, she had murdered an innocent. Next, she was fired from her dream job without so much as a severance check. And finally, her best friend was missing. It had been a week, a whole week. She had hired a private investigator to find him. On the third day, and she still hadn't heard from them. Her fingers were bitten down to the quick. Her hair was a wild and crazy mess, and her eyes had a deep purple bruise beneath them. Sleep hadn't visited her more than a few minutes since the day her life fell apart, the day she became a murderer. She shook the thought from her head, not ready to deal with it. She didn't think she would be ready to face thoughts like those until Cameron was once again at her side. She felt a buzz in her pocket. She scrambled frantically for the phone. Seeing the number, she slid the green phone without hesitation. Did you find him? Yeah, we found him. The voice on the other line sounded tired. Yeah, well, where is he? Can I talk to him? Layla asked insistently. She needed to know why he'd left her at the office, why he hadn't contacted her in weeks. And finally, we did it. We're done. I said I was gonna explain my plans for the rest of this story, but I'm actually too tired to do that. So instead, I'm just gonna end the stream here. Um, Thanks for stopping by and sticking around, Mimi. Though I'm probably muted right now, so you probably can't. I am going to, yeah, pop off. See you later. Bye.